How? Colt gasped, pinned to the ground. How'd you do that? Wren looked down at him, calm, unshaken. Training, she said quietly. 4 years of it. 3 weeks earlier, this same young man had slapped her across the face, in front of the whole town. He tore her father's hat from her head and threw it in the mud. Nobody stepped in to help her. Nobody knew what she was truly capable of. Because Wren Halloway had spent 4 years training in Krav Maga, in complete silence, taught by a retired security expert who saw something in her nobody else could see. She never wanted to use it. She just wanted to be ready. Now, staring down at the man who thought she was weak, Wren was about to show an entire town exactly what real strength looks like. And it wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was patient. And patient people are the most dangerous of all. There are people in this world who mistake silence for weakness. They hear a quiet voice and think it means nothing behind it. They see a calm face and think there is nothing underneath. This is a story about one of those people, and it is a story about the girl he thought he understood. Her name was Wren Halloway. She was 19 years old. She grew up on a small farm outside a town called Cedar Hollow. Cedar Hollow was not a place you would find on a map most people look at. It had one main street. It had a diner, a feed store, a church with a white steeple, and a courthouse that had not seen a real trial in 11 years. It had fields that stretched out further than the eye could follow, and it had people who still waved at strangers on the road. Wren was born in that town. She was raised in that town, and by the time this story begins, she had already survived more than most people her age ever should. But you would never know that by looking at her. You would see a young woman in worn boots and a faded flannel shirt. You would see dirt under her fingernails and calluses on her palms. You would see someone who worked before the sun came up and worked long after it went down. What you would not see, not at first, was what she carried inside her. Not until the day a young man named Colt Ashford decided to test her. That day would change everything. Not just for Wren, for the whole town of Cedar Hollow. But to understand how it started, you have to go back a little further. You have to understand who Wren was before anyone slapped her in front of a crowd. You have to understand the farm. You have to understand the mornings. Because everything that happened later only makes sense once you know what came before. So let's start there. Let's start with a Tuesday morning in early autumn. The sky was still dark. The air still smelled like cold dew and turned earth, and Wren Halloway was already awake. She woke up most mornings before her alarm even rang. Her body had learned the rhythm of the farm the way some people learn a song. At 4:45, she was already pulling on her boots. At 5, she was already outside. The cows did not care what day it was. The chickens did not care if she was tired. Life on a farm does not pause for grief, or exhaustion, or heartbreak. It simply keeps going. And Wren had learned that lesson the hard way, 3 years earlier. That was the year her parents died. A car accident on a wet road, late at night, coming home from a hospital visit to her grandfather. One moment, they were a family of 4. The next moment, they were a family of 2. Wren and her grandfather, Earl Halloway, alone on 60 acres of land that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. She did not talk about that night much, not because she had forgotten, but because some things do not get smaller with time. They just get carried differently. And Wren had learned to carry it the way her grandfather had taught her to carry a feed sack, not by pretending it was light, but by finding the right way to hold it so it would not break her back. That morning, like most mornings, she moved through her chores in silence. She filled the water troughs. She checked on the goats. She gathered eggs still warm from the hens. And she did all of it while the sun slowly climbed over the tree line, turning the frost on the grass into a thin silver light. If you had asked anyone in Cedar Hollow to describe Wren Halloway in one sentence, most of them would have said the same thing. She's the quiet one. She's the one who works hard and keeps to herself. She's Earl's granddaughter, the one who lost her folks. Bless her heart. They were not wrong, but they were not seeing all of her either. Because underneath that quiet exterior, Wren Halloway had a kind of discipline that most people twice her age never developed. She had a code she lived by. Work hard. Tell the truth. Protect the people who cannot protect themselves, and never, ever raise your hand against someone unless you have no other choice left. That last rule mattered more than any of the others. Because Wren Halloway was not just a farm girl who milked goats and drove an old pickup truck to community college 3 mornings a week. She was something else too, something almost nobody in Cedar Hollow knew about, something she had kept quiet for 4 years. To understand that part of her story, you have to go back to when she was 15. That was the year after her parents died. Earl Halloway had raised 3 children of his own, decades earlier, and buried a wife he still spoke of every single day. He was not a man who scared easily, but watching his granddaughter walk the farm alone, in the dark, before dawn and after dusk, that scared him. Cedar Hollow was mostly a safe place. But mostly is not the same as always, and Earl had lived long enough to know that bad things happen in quiet towns too. He had a friend, an old acquaintance from years back, a man named Gideon Marsh. Gideon had spent decades working in private security, training bodyguards and protection teams for people who could afford that kind of thing. Before that, he had trained in Krav Maga under some of the sharpest instructors in the country. He had retired to a small property just outside Cedar Hollow, mostly kept to himself, and fixed old radios as a hobby. Earl went to see him one evening, not long after the funeral. He did not ask for charity. He asked for a favor between old friends. "I've got a granddaughter," Earl said. 19 years old inside, but she's only 15. You understand me? Gideon understood. Grief ages a person faster than years ever could. She's out on that farm alone with me, Earl continued. I'm not as fast as I used to be, and I won't always be here. He paused. I need her to know how to protect herself, not to look for trouble, just to know that if trouble finds her, she won't be helpless. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Bring her by Saturday, he said. We'll see what she's made of. That Saturday changed the course of Wren's life. She was angry the first time she went. Angry in the quiet, tired way that grief makes a person angry. She did not want to learn how to fight. She wanted her parents back, but grief does not listen to what people want. So she showed up at Gideon Marsh's property with her arms crossed and her jaw set. Gideon did not push her. He simply handed her a bottle of water and told her to sit. You don't have to be here for me, he said. You don't have to be here for your grandfather either. She looked up at him. Then, why am I here? Because one day, Gideon said, something is going to happen. Maybe it's small, maybe it's big. And in that moment, you're going to have half a second to decide who you are. He crouched down to her eye level. I can't give you your parents back, he said. Nobody can. But I can make sure that whatever moment comes for you, you're not standing there helpless. That decision, that's the only gift I've got to give you. Something about that reached her. Maybe it was the honesty. Maybe it was that he did not pretend to fix her pain. He just offered her a tool to carry it with. She started training that week. At first it was slow. Basic stances, basic breathing, learning how to fall without hurting herself. Gideon was patient in a way that surprised her. He never yelled. He never made her feel small. He corrected her form the way a good teacher corrects a student's handwriting, gently and with purpose. Over the months, the training became something more than self-defense. It became a place where Wren could put her grief. Every strike she practiced was a place to put her anger. Every drill was a place to put her fear. By the time she was 16, she was moving with a precision that made Gideon raise an eyebrow. By 17, she could disarm a grown man twice her size, using nothing but leverage and timing. By 18, Gideon told Earl quietly, over coffee, that Wren had a natural gift most students never develop. She's not just skilled, he said. She's controlled. That's rare. Most people her age want to prove something. She just wants to be ready. Earl nodded slowly. That's her mother in her, he said. Steady as a stone that woman was. But there was one rule Gideon repeated more than any other. He said it so many times that Wren could recite it in her sleep. This is not for revenge, he told her, over and over. The day you use what I've taught you out of anger, you've already lost. You use it to protect, never to punish. Wren promised him she understood, and for years, she never had to prove it. Because for years, nothing happened that required her to use what she had learned. She kept training quietly, 2 mornings a week, before the sun came up, in the old barn behind Gideon's property. Nobody in town knew. Not her friends, not her professors. Only Earl and Gideon. It became her secret, not because she was ashamed of it, but because some things are stronger when they are kept close. And so for 4 years, Wren Halloway lived two lives. By daylight, she was the quiet farm girl who worked hard and kept to herself. Before dawn, twice a week, she was something else entirely, and nobody in Cedar Hollow had any idea. Until the day Colt Ashford decided that quiet meant weak. Let's talk about Colt Ashford now, because every story like this needs you to understand the other side too. Colt was 22 years old. He had grown up in Cedar Hollow, but not the way Wren had. His father, Warren Ashford, was the head of a real estate company called Ashford Land Holdings. The company bought struggling farmland across the county, sometimes fairly, and sometimes through pressure that looked legal on paper, but felt like something else entirely. Warren Ashford was a man who believed that money was the same thing as being right, and he raised his son to believe the exact same thing. Colt had been the star of the high school football team 5 years earlier. He had been used to attention his whole life. Teachers overlooked his outbursts because his father sat on the school board. Coaches gave him extra chances because his father funded the new stadium lights. By the time Colt turned 22, he had never once faced a real consequence for anything he had done. Not one. And a person who never faces consequences starts to believe consequences do not apply to them. Colt was not stupid. He was not even cruel in the cartoonish way villains sometimes are. He was something more familiar than that. He was a young man who had been given everything and had never been taught what to do with it except use it as a weapon. He surrounded himself with two friends who mostly went along with whatever he wanted. Dean Prescott, quiet and easily led. Cody Marsh, no relation to Gideon, loud and eager to laugh at whatever Colt found funny. Neither of them were bad at their core. They were the kind of young men who go along with things because standing apart from the group feels harder than it should. That is often how harm spreads in small towns. Not through one cruel man alone, but through a handful of people who are too comfortable or too afraid to say enough. Colt had noticed Wren Halloway before, in the way small towns make everyone notice everyone eventually. He knew she worked hard. He knew she kept to herself. He knew her parents had died 3 years back, and somewhere in his mind, that made her seem like an easy target. Quiet, poor, alone, except for an old man on a struggling farm. He had no idea what he was about to walk into. The Saturday morning market in Cedar Hollow had been a tradition for almost 40 years. Farmers set up tables in the town square, selling vegetables, honey, eggs, goat cheese, and homemade jams. It was the kind of event where half the town showed up, not because they needed anything, but because it was a chance to see their neighbors. Wren had been coming to that market since she could walk. As a little girl, she used to sit under her father's table, playing with the loose change in an old cigar box while her parents sold sweet corn and tomatoes. Now, 3 years after losing them, she still came every Saturday, running the family table alongside her grandfather. It was one of the few places where the ache of missing her parents felt bearable, because in some strange way, being at that market kept her close to them. The straw hat she wore was proof of that. It had belonged to her father, wide-brimmed, sun-faded, the leather band worn soft from years of sweat and sun. She wore it every single Saturday, rain or shine. It was not just a hat to her. It was a piece of him she could still carry. On this particular Saturday, the sky was clear, the air was crisp, and the square was crowded with the usual mix of neighbors, tourists passing through, and children running between the tables. Wren stood behind the family table, arranging jars of honey in neat rows. Earl sat in a folding chair nearby, chatting with an old friend about the price of feed corn. For a moment, everything felt ordinary, peaceful even. Then a truck pulled up too fast at the edge of the square, tires kicking up gravel, and 3 young men climbed out laughing. Colt Ashford, Dean Prescott, Cody Marsh. They had clearly been drinking, even though it was not yet noon. Wren noticed them immediately, not because she was afraid, but because something about the way they moved through the crowd, loud, careless, entitled, put her instincts on alert. She kept working. She did not stare. She simply stayed aware. Colt made his way toward the produce tables, weaving slightly, bumping into an elderly woman's basket of apples and sending several rolling across the pavement. He did not stop to help. He laughed and kept walking. The elderly woman, flustered, knelt down to gather her apples herself. Nobody nearby moved to help either. That was the first small warning sign of the kind of morning it was going to be. Wren watched from a distance, jaw tightening, but she stayed at her table. Not every fight needs to be picked. Sometimes restraint is its own kind of strength. But then Colt's path curved toward the Halloway table. "Well, look who it is," Colt said, loud enough for several nearby tables to hear. Wren looked up calmly. "Morning, Colt. Still out here selling dirt vegetables?" "Huh," he said, gesturing at the neat rows of tomatoes and squash. "Cute little hobby you and your grandpa got going." Earl's expression hardened, but he stayed seated, watching closely. Wren did not respond to the jab. She simply kept arranging the jars in front of her. Colt did not like being ignored. He stepped closer, resting a hand on the edge of the table. "You know my daddy's gonna own this whole square eventually," he said. "Along with your little farm, probably." "Is that so?" Wren said, her voice level. "That's so," Colt said, smirking. "Y'all should sell now while you still get a good price. Save yourselves the embarrassment." Wren met his eyes. "We're not selling," she said simply. "Now if you don't mind, you're leaning on our honey jars." A few nearby vendors chuckled quietly at that, which only irritated Colt further. He straightened up, glancing back at Dean and Cody, who were watching with the kind of nervous excitement young men get when they sense a scene brewing. "Feisty for a girl who sells eggs for a living," Colt said. "There's nothing wrong with selling eggs," Wren replied. "Might do you some good to earn an honest living sometime." The crowd's attention had shifted now. A dozen or so people nearby had paused their shopping, sensing the tension rising. Colt's face flushed, embarrassment quickly turning to anger. He reached out and knocked over a small stack of jars, sending two of them shattering on the pavement, honey spreading across the ground in a slow golden pool. "Oops," he said, not sounding sorry at all. Earl rose from his chair now, moving toward the table. "That's enough," Earl said, his voice firm despite his age. "You've had your fun. Time to move along." Colt turned toward him, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. "Or what, old man?" The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Wren stepped forward instinctively, placing herself slightly between her grandfather and Colt. Not aggressively, just present, a boundary, quiet but clear. "He asked you to leave," she said. "I'm asking you too." For a moment, something in Colt's expression flickered, as if some small part of him recognized he had gone too far. But pride, especially the kind fed by money and years of no consequences, rarely backs down easily. Instead, his eyes dropped to the straw hat on her head, and something cruel settled into his face. "Nice hat," Colt said, reaching out suddenly and yanking it off her head before she could react. Wren's whole body went still, not from fear, from something deeper. That hat was not just fabric and straw. It was her father's hands adjusting the brim on hot summer days. It was her father's laugh, telling her stories while they worked the fields together. It was one of the last pieces of him she had left to hold on to. "Give it back," she said, her voice quiet but hard as stone. Colt spun the hat on his finger, grinning at his friends. "What, this old thing? Looks like it belongs in the trash." "Colt," Wren said again, sharper now, "give it back." Instead, he tossed it, deliberately, into a muddy puddle near the curb, formed from the previous night's rain. Then, for good measure, he stepped on it, twisting his boot into the straw, grinding it into the mud. A gasp rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. Earl took a step forward, fury tightening every line on his weathered face. "You son of a..." "Don't," Wren said quickly, catching his arm. She understood something Colt clearly did not. If her grandfather, at 74 years old, tried to confront a strong 22-year-old man fueled by alcohol and anger, someone was going to get hurt, and it would not be Colt. So instead, Wren stepped forward herself, calm on the outside, though something hot and controlled was building beneath her calm. She knelt down, picked up the ruined hat from the mud, and straightened up slowly. Mud dripped from the brim onto her boots. "You think that's funny," she said quietly. "A little bit, yeah," Colt said, still grinning, emboldened by his friend's nervous laughter behind him. Wren looked at him for a long moment. Something in her gaze had shifted. It was not anger exactly. It was something colder, steadier, a warning if he had known how to read it. "You should walk away now," she said, "while you still can with some dignity left." Colt laughed outright at that. "Dignity? From you?" He stepped closer, invading her space in a way meant to intimidate. You think you're something special, farm girl? You're nothing. You're nothing. Your family's nothing. In a week, this whole square is gonna belong to my daddy, and you're gonna be begging us for work." Wren did not step back. She held his gaze, unflinching. "Last chance," she said quietly. "Walk away." That was when Colt made the mistake that would change the direction of his entire life. He raised his hand and slapped her across the face. The sound cracked through the square like a gunshot. For one full second, absolute silence fell over the crowd. Wren's head had turned slightly with the force of the blow, her cheek immediately blooming red. But she did not fall. She did not cry out. She slowly turned her head back to face him, eyes steady, unshaken. Somewhere behind her, Earl let out a strangled sound of fury and grief combined. Starting forward again, Ruthie Colson, the diner owner, who had been setting up her own table nearby, dropped a tray of pastries in shock. An elderly man nearby, a retired schoolteacher named Harold Fenwick, stood frozen, his hand halfway raised as if he wanted to intervene, but did not know how. Nobody moved to stop it. Nobody moved to help. That, in some ways, was almost as painful as the slap itself. But Wren did not need them to move. Every instinct in her body, every year of training with Gideon Marsh screamed at her to respond. Her hands could have found 3 different ways to put Colt Ashford on the ground within 2 seconds. She knew exactly how to do it. She had practiced it 1,000 times. But in that half second, Gideon's voice echoed in her memory, clear as if he were standing beside her. "This is not for revenge. The day you use what I've taught you out of anger, you've already lost." So instead, Wren simply stood there, absorbing the sting, keeping her hands loose and open at her sides. Not out of fear, out of choice. That choice, more than anything else, was the truest measure of her strength. "You," she said quietly, her voice trembling only slightly, "just made a very big mistake." Colt sneered, though something in his expression flickered, uncertain now, as if some instinct in him recognized he had crossed further than he meant to. "What are you gonna do about it?" he said. "Cry to your grandpa?" Wren held the ruined hat against her chest. "No," she said. "I'm going to let you walk away right now, because there are people here who don't deserve to see what happens if you don't." Something about her tone made even Dean and Cody exchange uneasy glances. There was a stillness in her that unsettled them more than shouting ever could. Colt, still riding the high of his own anger, laughed it off, though the laugh sounded hollow now. "Whatever," he muttered. "Enjoy your dirt farm while it lasts." He turned, gesturing for his friends to follow, and swaggered back toward his truck, though his steps were slightly less confident than when he had arrived. The crowd remained silent as the truck peeled away from the square, gravel scattering behind it. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Earl was at Wren's side, his hands trembling as he examined the red burnt mark blooming across her cheek. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice thick with barely controlled rage and worry. "I'm fine, Grandpa," Wren said softly. "That boy," Earl said, jaw clenched. "I ought to." "You're not doing anything," Wren said firmly, meeting his eyes. "Not today." Ruthie Colson hurried over, offering a clean cloth and a look of horrified sympathy. "Sweetheart, are you sure you're all right? Should we call the sheriff?" Wren considered that for a moment, holding the cloth gently against her stinging cheek. "Not yet," she said quietly. "Let's just go home." Harold Fenwick, the retired schoolteacher, approached, slowly, still looking shaken. "I should have stepped in," he admitted quietly. "I'm sorry I didn't." Wren looked at him, and something soft flickered in her expression despite everything. "It's all right," she said. "Most people freeze up. That's just how people are." But even as she said it, a small part of her noted something important. Fear had kept a whole crowd of grown adults from stepping in to help a 19-year-old girl get slapped in broad daylight. That fear was not really about Colt Ashford himself. It was about his father, about the power the Ashford family held over half the town, through loans, leases, and land deals that could make or break a family's livelihood. That fear was its own kind of quiet violence, spreading through Cedar Hollow long before Colt ever raised his hand. Wren picked up the ruined hat again, brushing mud from the brim as gently as she could. It would need real cleaning, maybe even repair. But she was not ready to throw it away. Some things, even damaged, are still worth holding on to. She helped her grandfather pack up what remained of their table. The broken honey jars were swept aside. The morning's earnings were far less than they should have been. Half their produce left unsold as customers, shaken by what they had witnessed, drifted away earlier than usual. But Wren did not complain about the lost sales. There were far more important things weighing on her mind. That evening the farmhouse was quiet. Earl sat across from Wren at the kitchen table, a pot of untouched stew going cold between them. The bruise on her cheek had darkened slightly, a soft purple blooming beneath her eye. Earl studied her carefully for a long moment before speaking. "You could have handled that boy," he said quietly. "Couldn't you?" It was not really a question. Wren met his eyes, saying nothing at first. "I know what Gideon taught you," Earl continued. "I know what 4 years of training does to a person's reflexes. You didn't even flinch when he stepped toward you." Wren looked down at her hands, calloused from years of farm work, steady despite everything. "I could have," she admitted quietly. "I thought about it. For about half a second I thought about exactly how." "Then why didn't you?" She looked up at him, something old and tired in her eyes, far older than her 19 years. "Because Gideon always told me," she said, "that the day I use what he taught me out of anger, I've already lost. That boy wanted a reaction from me. He wanted me to make a scene, to give him a reason to say I attacked him first. I wasn't going to give him that." Earl was quiet for a long moment, pride and worry mixing in his expression. "You've got more control than I ever had at your age," he said finally. "Your grandmother used to say the same thing about restraint. Said real strength was quiet most of the time." Wren managed a small, tired smile at that. "I remember her saying something like that," she said softly. "I was young, but I remember." Earl reached across the table, gently touching the ruined hat sitting beside her plate. "Your father wore this hat every single day I ever saw him outside," he said quietly. "Rain or shine. Said it kept the sun off his neck, but I think it was more than that." "It was," Wren agreed softly. "He used to say wearing his father's hat, your hat, kept him honest, reminded him where he came from." Earl's eyes grew misty for a moment, though he blinked it away quickly, the way men of his generation often did with grief. "We'll clean it up," he said. "Good and proper. It'll be all right." Wren nodded, though something heavier still sat on her mind. "Grandpa," she said slowly, "there's something else. Something that came in the mail today, before we left for the market." Earl's expression shifted, curiosity mixing with concern. "What is it?" Wren reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a folded envelope, the seal already broken. She slid it across the table toward him. Earl unfolded the letter slowly, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he read. The letterhead bore the logo of Ashford Land Holdings, sleek and modern, an unsettling contrast against the simple wood of their kitchen table. His eyes scanned the formal, cold language of the letter. It explained, in careful legal phrasing, that Ashford Land Holdings was interested in acquiring the Halloway property, along with several other parcels in the surrounding area, for a new agricultural development project. It offered what it called a generous purchase price, though the amount listed was far below what the land was truly worth. And then, buried in the final paragraph, was the part that made Earl's jaw tighten. The letter stated that if an agreement was not reached within 7 days, Ashford Land Holdings would be forced to pursue alternative legal measures regarding certain zoning discrepancies and outstanding county code violations related to the property. It was vague, deliberately vague, but the threat underneath the polite language was unmistakable. "Sell or face consequences we won't fully explain, but that will cost you more than you can afford to fight." Earl set the letter down slowly, his hands still trembling, though now from anger rather than age. 7 days, he muttered. 7 days to hand over 60 years of family land, or they'll make something up to take it anyway. Wren watched her grandfather carefully. "You've never mentioned any zoning issues before," she said. "Have you?" "Because there aren't any," Earl said firmly. "Not real ones, anyway. This land's been in our family for 3 generations. Your great-grandfather cleared half these fields with his own 2 hands. There's no code violation. This is nothing but a scare tactic." "Then why send it?" Wren asked quietly. Earl looked at her, something tired and knowing in his expression. "Because scare tactics work," he said. "Especially on folks who don't have the money to hire a lawyer and fight back. Warren Ashford's done this to at least 4 other farms in this county over the past 2 years. Old Man Petrov's land out past the county line. The Delacroix family further south. They all sold eventually, ground down by threats and legal fees they couldn't afford. Wren sat with that information for a long moment, connecting it slowly to the events of that morning. Colt mentioned something at the market, she said slowly. Something about his father owning the whole square eventually. Earl's expression darkened further. That boy's daddy is trying to buy up half this county, he said, and apparently his son thought today would be a good day to remind us of that fact with his fists. The two pieces of the day's events settled together in Wren's mind, forming a picture far larger and more troubling than she had initially realized. This was not just a random act of cruelty from a spoiled young man. This was connected to something bigger, something calculated, something with real power and money behind it. "We're not selling," Wren said firmly. "No," Earl agreed, "we are not. Not now, not in 7 days, not ever. If I've got any say in the matter." But even as he said the words, a flicker of worry crossed his weathered face, quickly hidden, but not quickly enough for Wren to miss it. They both understood, without needing to say it aloud, that this fight was only just beginning. That night, after Earl had gone to bed, Wren sat alone at the kitchen table, the ruined straw hat resting in her lap. She worked carefully at the mud stains with a damp cloth, gently reshaping the brim where Colt's boot had crushed it. It would never look exactly the same again, but it could be saved. As she worked, her mind drifted back over the events of the day. The slap still stung, though the physical pain had already begun to fade. What lingered longer was something else entirely. The way the crowd had frozen, the way nobody, not one single adult in that square, had stepped forward to stop a young man from striking a teenage girl in broad daylight. It was not that the people of Cedar Hollow were bad people. Wren knew most of them personally. Ruthie Colson had brought casseroles to their house every week for a month after her parents died. Harold Fenwick had once spent an entire Saturday helping Earl repair a broken tractor, refusing any payment. These were good people, kind people, but fear has a way of freezing even good people in place. And the fear that gripped Cedar Hollow was not really about Colt Ashford's fists. It was about his father's money, his father's power, his father's ability to call in loans, cancel leases, and quietly ruin a family's livelihood with nothing more than a phone call and a signature. That kind of fear was its own quiet epidemic, spreading through small towns like Cedar Hollow long before any single act of cruelty made it visible. Wren thought about Gideon Marsh's words, echoing again in her memory. "You use it to protect, never to punish." She understood now, more clearly than ever, that the real fight ahead of her was not going to be won with fists alone. Colt Ashford was dangerous, certainly, but his father, Warren Ashford, and the system of fear and financial pressure he had built across the county, that was the real threat looming over her family's future. And that kind of threat required more than just physical skill to overcome. It required patience, it required allies, it required proof. Wren finished cleaning the hat as best she could, setting it gently on the windowsill to dry overnight, moonlight falling softly across its worn brim. Tomorrow she would begin figuring out exactly what needed to be done. But tonight, for just a little while longer, she allowed herself to simply sit with her grief, her anger, and the quiet strength that had carried her through every hard season of her young life so far. Outside, the farm was silent except for the occasional lowing of a distant cow and the soft rustle of wind moving through the fields her family had tended for 3 generations. It was a peace that felt, for the moment at least, fragile, but it was still peace, and Wren intended to protect it with everything she had. The next morning arrived the same way most mornings did on the Halloway farm, dark, cold, and demanding. Wren rose before dawn out of habit, her body aching slightly from the tension of the previous day, the bruise on her cheek now a deeper shade of purple beneath her eye. She dressed quietly, pulling on her boots, and made her way out into the pre-dawn chill. But this morning, instead of heading straight to the barn for chores, she detoured slightly, walking the narrow dirt path that led toward Gideon Marsh's property 1/2 mile down the road. It had been almost 2 weeks since her last training session, farm work and school responsibilities eating into her usual schedule. But after yesterday, she felt a pull to return, not necessarily for physical practice, but for something closer to guidance. Gideon's property was modest, A small house surrounded by neatly kept gardens, and an old barn converted years ago into a private training space. He was already awake when she arrived, as he almost always was, sitting on his porch with a cup of black coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. "Wren Halloway," he said, not turning immediately, though his voice carried warmth. "Didn't expect you this morning." "Couldn't sleep much," she admitted, climbing the porch steps. Gideon glanced at her then, his sharp eyes immediately catching the bruise on her cheek. His expression hardened slightly, though his voice remained calm. "Somebody hit you," he said. It was not a question. Wren nodded slowly, lowering herself into the chair beside him. "At the market yesterday," she said. "Colt Ashford." Gideon's jaw tightened, but he said nothing at first, waiting for her to continue. She told him everything. The humiliation, the destroyed hat, the slap, and most importantly, her decision not to respond with the training he had given her. When she finished, Gideon was quiet for a long moment, studying her carefully. "You did the right thing," he said finally. "Did I?" Wren asked softly. "Because it didn't feel like winning." Gideon set his coffee mug down, turning to face her fully. "Restraint rarely feels like winning in the moment," he said. "It feels like losing. Every instinct in your body was screaming at you to respond, wasn't it?" "Every single one," she admitted. "That's exactly why it mattered," Gideon said. "Anyone can throw a punch when they're angry enough. That takes no skill at all, no character. What takes real strength is standing there, absorbing pain, and choosing not to become the very thing you despise." Wren absorbed his words slowly, feeling some of the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. "He's not going to stop," she said quietly. "Colt, I mean. Yesterday wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning." Gideon nodded slowly, his expression grave. "I suspect you're right," he said. "Men like that, men who've never faced real consequences, they don't back down from restraint. They see it as weakness to exploit further. So what do I do?" Gideon was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. "You keep doing exactly what you've been doing," he said finally. "You stay disciplined, you stay patient, and you remember, always, that what I taught you is a shield, not a sword. You use it only when there is no other choice left, only when someone who cannot defend themselves is in real danger." He paused, studying her closely. "But Wren," he continued, his voice softening slightly, "there is no shame in protecting yourself either. When that moment comes, restraint is not the same as allowing harm. There's a difference between choosing peace and accepting abuse. You understand that difference?" Wren nodded slowly. "I think I'm starting to," she said. They spent the next hour in the old barn, moving through slow, deliberate drills, more meditative than aggressive. Gideon rarely raised his voice during training, preferring instead to guide her through corrections with quiet, precise instructions. "Weight on your back foot," he said, watching her stance. "Good. Now relax your shoulders. Tension slows you down more than it protects you." Wren moved through the familiar patterns, muscle memory carrying her body through motions she had practiced hundreds of times before. There was something calming about the repetition, something that helped settle the storm of emotions still churning beneath her calm exterior. As they finished, both slightly out of breath, Gideon handed her a towel and studied her thoughtfully. "There's something else troubling you," he observed, "something beyond the boy." Wren hesitated, then told him about the letter from Ashford Land Holdings, the 7-day deadline, the vague threats about zoning violations. Gideon's expression grew increasingly serious as she spoke. "Warren Ashford," he said slowly, once she finished. "I know that name, you do." Gideon nodded, setting down his own towel, his expression distant, as if recalling something from long ago. "Years back, before I retired out here, I did some private security consulting work," he said carefully. "Different clients, different projects. His name came up once or twice, in circles I no longer associate with. Ambitious man. Ruthless from what I remember hearing." "What kind of circles?" Wren asked carefully. Gideon was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh how much to share. "That's a conversation for another day," he said finally. "For now, just know this. If Warren Ashford is coming after your family's land with threats and pressure tactics, he's likely done this before, and he'll likely have some kind of paper trail, however carefully hidden, of doing it improperly." "How do you know that?" Because men who build power through fear rarely stop at just one family, Gideon said. Patterns like that tend to repeat themselves. If your grandfather asks around quietly, other families in this county, he may find he's not the first one to receive a letter like that. Wren considered this carefully, a new sense of direction beginning to form in her mind. Thank you, she said softly, for everything, yesterday and today. Gideon offered her a rare, warm smile. You're a remarkable young woman, Wren Halloway, he said. Your parents would be proud of the person you've become. I hope you know that. Something tightened in Wren's throat at those words, grief and gratitude, mixing together in a familiar, bittersweet way. Thank you, she whispered again, before turning to head back toward the farm, the sun now fully risen over the horizon, casting long golden light across the fields she loved so deeply. Back at the farmhouse, Earl was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a look of quiet determination on his face. Spread out in front of him were several sheets of paper, notes scribbled in his careful handwriting. Morning, Wren said, hanging her jacket by the door. Morning, Earl replied, not looking up immediately, still focused on his notes. Made a few calls already this morning. To who? Old friends, Earl said, finally glancing up. Roy Petrov out past the county line. Remember him? Vaguely, Wren said, pouring herself a cup of coffee and sitting down across from him. He sold his land to Ashford Land Holdings about 18 months back, Earl continued. Received a very similar letter to the one we got yesterday. Vague threats about code violations, 7-day deadline, the whole routine. Did he fight it? Earl shook his head slowly, expression grim. Couldn't afford to, he said. Hired a lawyer for one consultation, got quoted a fee higher than what Ashford was offering for the land itself. Felt trapped, sold within the week. Wren felt anger tightening in her chest again, the same anger she had carefully controlled the day before at the market. That's not right, she said quietly. No, Earl agreed. It's not, but it's effective, apparently, for men who don't care much about right and wrong, only about results. He slid one of his notepads across the table toward her. I called 3 other families this morning, he continued. The Delacroix family, the Hendersons, and old Miss Kessler up the road. Wren's attention sharpened at that last name. Miss Opal, she said, she got a letter too? Earl nodded grimly. Just last week, apparently. She's scared half to death, poor woman. Lives alone since her husband passed, barely getting by on that small pension of hers. Ashford's people have been pressuring her hard, she said. Even had someone come by her property uninvited, taking photographs and measurements without her permission. Wren's jaw tightened at the thought of anyone frightening the elderly widow who had lived alone on her small property for nearly a decade, tending a modest garden and a few chickens, fiercely independent despite her advancing age. We need to help her, Wren said firmly. We will, Earl agreed. But first, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. This isn't just about our farm anymore, Wren, it's bigger than that. He tapped his notepad thoughtfully. I think it's time we spoke with Eleanor Voss, he said. The lawyer downtown. Earl nodded. She's retired mostly now. Takes on cases only when something catches her interest. But she's sharp as a tack. And, from what I hear, she's had her eye on Ashford Land Holdings for a while now, for reasons of her own. Wren felt a small flicker of hope amid the tension of the past 2 days. Let's go talk to her then, she said. Today, if possible. Earl smiled slightly, a familiar look of quiet pride crossing his weathered features. That's my girl, he said softly, always ready to fight for what matters. Eleanor Voss's office was located above the old hardware store on Main Street, a small, unassuming space with a hand-painted sign reading simply, Voss Legal Services. Eleanor herself was a striking woman, in her late 60s, silver hair pulled back neatly, sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She greeted Earl and Wren warmly, though her expression grew serious once they explained the reason for their visit. Warren Ashford, she said, once they had finished, her tone carrying an edge of something like grim satisfaction. I wondered when someone might come to me about him. You know him? Wren asked. I know of his methods, Eleanor replied carefully. I've represented 2 other families in this county over the past 3 years. Families who received letters remarkably similar to the one you're describing. Vague legal threats, tight deadlines, pressure tactics designed to frighten people into selling below fair market value. Did you win those cases? Earl asked. Eleanor's expression turned complicated. One family settled before we could properly build a case, she admitted. Fear got the better of them, understandably. The other case is technically still open, though it's been stalled in county paperwork for months now, likely due to influence Ashford's company holds with certain local officials. That's not exactly encouraging, Wren said honestly. No, Eleanor agreed. But it's the truth, and I believe in being truthful with my clients from the very beginning. Fighting men like Warren Ashford is difficult. He has resources, connections, and a legal team paid specifically to make ordinary people feel powerless. She paused, studying both of them carefully. However, she continued, I don't believe he's untouchable. Men who build power through fear and pressure tend to leave a trail of exactly that, fear and pressure, documented somewhere, by someone. It simply takes patience and persistence to uncover it. What do you need from us? Earl asked. Everything, Eleanor said simply. Every letter, every phone call, every interaction, no matter how small it seems. Document everything from this point forward, and speak with your neighbors quietly. If others have received similar letters, similar threats, similar pressure, patterns begin to emerge. Patterns are what eventually build a real case. Wren nodded firmly, already mentally cataloging everything that had happened over the past 2 days. There's something else, she said slowly. Yesterday, at the market, Colt Ashford, Warren's son, assaulted me in front of a crowd of witnesses. Eleanor's sharp eyes narrowed with interest. Tell me everything, she said. Wren recounted the incident in careful detail, watching as Eleanor took rapid notes, her expression growing increasingly focused. Witnesses, you said? Eleanor confirmed. Once, Wren finished. At least a dozen people, Wren said. Maybe more. That's significant, Eleanor said, almost to herself. Assault charges properly documented and witnessed, that's a very different kind of leverage than land disputes and zoning threats. I don't want to press charges out of spite, Wren said honestly. I just want them to leave my family and my neighbors alone. Eleanor studied her for a long moment, something like respect crossing her sharp features. That's a wise instinct, she said. Spite rarely serves justice well, but documentation, evidence, truth brought clearly into the light, that serves justice very well indeed. Let's proceed carefully, and let's proceed together. By the time Earl and Wren left Eleanor's small office that afternoon, a new sense of direction had settled over them both. The fight ahead of them was far from over. If anything, it had only just truly begun. But for the first time since receiving that unsettling letter, they no longer felt entirely alone in facing it. Meanwhile, across town, in the sleek modern offices of Ashford Land Holdings, Colt Ashford sat across from his father Warren, in a leather chair far too expensive for the mood of the conversation taking place. Warren Ashford was a tall, imposing man in his 50s, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the kind of controlled anger that felt far more dangerous than shouting ever could. I heard about what happened at the market yesterday, Warren said, his voice deceptively calm. Colt shifted uncomfortably in his seat. It wasn't a big deal, he said. Just some farm girl mouthing off. I handled it. You handled it, Warren repeated flatly, by striking her, in front of half the town, including at least 2 people who owe me money, and might now feel emboldened to gossip about my son, assaulting a teenage girl in broad daylight. Colt's jaw tightened defensively. She disrespected me, he muttered. In front of Dean and Cody, in front of everybody. Warren studied his son for a long, cold moment. I don't care about your ego, he said finally. I care about results. And right now, you've created a problem, a very public, very witnessed problem. At precisely the moment, I need the Halloway family compliant and quiet, not angry and motivated. They're just farmers, Colt said dismissively. They can't do anything. Everyone can do something, Warren said sharply, especially when they're angry, and especially when they have witnesses on their side. He rose from his desk, moving to the window overlooking the town square below. I want you to stay away from the Halloway property, he said, without turning around. Completely. No more confrontations, no more public displays. Do you understand me? Yes, sir, Colt muttered, though something resentful flickered behind his eyes. Warren turned back to face him, his expression hardening further. This deal needs to close within 7 days, he said. I have investors waiting, permits pending, timelines that cannot slip. If that old man and his granddaughter decide to fight this instead of simply selling quietly, it complicates everything. Do you understand what's at stake here? I understand, Colt said, though his tone carried more frustration than genuine comprehension. Warren studied his son for a long moment, something calculating shifting behind his eyes. Perhaps, he said slowly, there's a different approach worth considering. Something less public, less witnessed. What do you mean? Colt asked. Warren did not answer directly, instead moving back toward his desk, already dismissing his son from the conversation. Just stay away from that farm for now, he said. I'll handle the rest. Colt left his father's office, feeling a mixture of resentment and confusion, uncertain exactly what his father meant, but sensing, correctly, that whatever came next would not be gentle. That evening, back at the small diner in the center of Cedar Hollow, word of the market incident had spread through town with particular speed that only small-town gossip achieves. Ruthie Colson stood behind the counter, refilling coffee cups, listening to the murmured conversations happening throughout her establishment. Can you believe that boy? One older woman whispered to her companion, striking that poor girl right there in the square. And nobody did a thing to stop it, her friend replied, shaking her head. We're all just too scared of his daddy's money. That's the truth of it. Ruthie moved between the booths, catching fragments of similar conversations throughout the evening. Fear and guilt seemed to hang thick in the diner's air, a town collectively processing its own failure to protect one of its own. Near the back booth, Harold Fenwick sat alone, nursing a cup of coffee, his expression troubled. Ruthie approached him gently, refilling his cup. You all right, Harold? She asked softly. He looked up at her, something heavy in his tired eyes. I keep thinking about yesterday, he admitted. I was standing right there. I could have stepped in, said something, done something. Instead, I just froze, like some kind of coward. You're no coward, Harold, Ruthie said firmly. You're a 70-year-old man facing off against a drunk 22-year-old with money and power behind him. None of us knew what to do. That's not an excuse, Harold said quietly. Wren's parents were good people. I taught alongside her mother for years at the elementary school before I retired. I owe that family better than silence. Ruthie studied him thoughtfully for a moment. Then don't stay silent going forward, she said gently. If something like this happens again, speak up. That's all any of us can do, really. Learn from the moments we failed and do better the next time. Harold nodded slowly, something resolved settling into his expression. You're right, he said. I will. Across the diner, unnoticed by most patrons, Dean Prescott sat alone in a corner booth, having slipped in quietly for a late dinner after his shift at the hardware store. He had been unusually quiet since the incident at the market, the memory of Wren's calm, steady voice replaying in his mind far more than he wanted to admit. You should walk away now, while you still can, with some dignity left. Something about those words, and the strange stillness in her eyes as she said them, had unsettled him deeply, though he could not quite articulate why. He picked at his food, lost in thought, until Cody Marsh slid into the booth across from him, grinning widely. Hey man, you good? You've been weird all day. Dean glanced up, hesitating before answering. Did something seem off to you? He asked quietly. Yesterday, I mean. With that farm girl. Cody frowned, considering the question. Off how? I don't know, Dean admitted. The way she just stood there after Colt hit her. Didn't even flinch. Barely reacted at all. Just looked at him like she was, I don't know, deciding something. Cody shrugged, unconcerned. She's just tough, I guess. Farm girls usually are. Dean nodded slowly, though the uneasy feeling lingered, a small seed of doubt planted deep within him that he could not quite shake. 3 days passed following the market incident, each one bringing small but significant developments. Earl and Wren continued gathering information quietly, speaking discreetly with neighboring families, documenting every interaction, every letter, every hint of pressure from Ashford Land Holdings. Miss Opal Kessler, the elderly widow living alone up the road, welcomed their visit with tearful relief, grateful to finally have someone acknowledge the fear she had been carrying alone for weeks. They came by again yesterday, she told them, her voice trembling slightly as she poured tea with unsteady hands. 2 men in suits, taking photographs of my property boundaries, without so much as a knock on my door first. Did they say anything to you directly? Earl asked gently. Just that my property line might be in violation of some county setback requirement, Opal said, shaking her head. I've lived on this land for 43 years, raised my children here, buried my husband on the hill out back. Never once had a problem with my property line before. Wren gently squeezed the elderly woman's hand. You're not alone in this, she said firmly. We're going to help you however we can. Opal's eyes filled with grateful tears. Your mother would be so proud of you, she whispered. You've got her kindness, and your father's strength. Wren felt her own eyes sting slightly at the mention of her parents, though she managed a small warm smile in response. Thank you, she said softly. That means more than you know. Meanwhile, at the local feed store where Wren worked part-time 3 afternoons a week, an incident occurred that, unbeknownst to her at the time, would plant an important seed for events still to come. The feed store was a modest establishment, run by a kind, elderly man named Walter Higgins, who had known Wren's family for decades. That particular afternoon, a heavy-set trucker, clearly frustrated after a long delivery route, began loudly arguing with Walter over a supposed billing discrepancy, his voice rising steadily, drawing uneasy glances from other customers. This is robbery, the trucker shouted, slamming his fist on the counter, hard enough to rattle nearby displays. I want my money back right now. Walter, visibly nervous, attempted to explain the pricing calmly, but the trucker's agitation only increased, his movements becoming more aggressive, more threatening. Wren, stocking shelves nearby, calmly set down the bag of feed she had been carrying and approached the counter. Sir, she said, her voice steady and calm, I understand you're frustrated. Let's take a look at the invoice together and figure this out. The trucker turned toward her, still agitated, sizing up the young woman standing calmly before him. This isn't your business, little girl, he snapped. Stay out of it. It is my business, Wren said evenly, not backing away despite his imposing size and clear anger. Mr. Higgins is my employer, and I'd like to help resolve this peacefully, for everyone's sake. Something about her steady, unafraid demeanor seemed to catch the trucker off guard slightly, his aggressive posture faltering just a fraction. Let's see the invoice. Wren continued calmly, gesturing toward the paperwork on the counter, maintaining steady eye contact, her stance relaxed but alert, weight balanced evenly, ready to respond instantly if necessary, though her outward demeanor remained entirely calm. The trucker hesitated, then reluctantly handed over the paperwork, his aggression slowly deflating under her calm, patient handling of the situation. Within a few minutes, Wren had identified a simple clerical error, explained it clearly, and resolved the dispute entirely without raising her voice once, the trucker eventually leaving the store with a mumbled apology. His earlier anger dissipated entirely. An elderly customer, who had been quietly observing the entire interaction from a nearby aisle, approached Walter Higgins once the trucker departed. The man was in his 70s, with the upright, disciplined bearing of someone who had once served in a structured, demanding profession, though nothing about his casual clothing hinted directly at what that profession might have been. That young lady handled that remarkably well, he observed thoughtfully. Walter nodded, still slightly shaken from the confrontation. Wren's always been steady like that, he agreed. Never seen her rattled, not once. The elderly man studied Wren thoughtfully from a distance as she calmly returned to restocking shelves, her movements economical and precise, the same steady control, evident even in something as simple as arranging feed bags. Interesting, he murmured to himself. Something like professional recognition crossing his weathered features. His name was Franklin Beaumont, a retired county sheriff's deputy who had relocated to Cedar Hollow several years earlier following his retirement. He had spent 30 years in law enforcement, trained extensively in de-escalation tactics and conflict resolution, and he recognized, immediately and precisely, the particular kind of calm control Wren had just demonstrated. It was not the natural calm of someone simply unbothered by conflict. It was the trained, deliberate calm of someone who had been taught, extensively, how to manage confrontation without losing control. That kind of calm did not develop naturally. It was built through years of careful, disciplined training. Franklin made a mental note to mention his observation to his old friend, Sheriff Boone Whitaker, the next time their paths crossed. Something about Wren Halloway, he suspected, was not quite what most of Cedar Hollow assumed. That evening, Sheriff Boone Whitaker made his way out to the Halloway farm, ostensibly to follow up on the market incident report Earl had eventually filed, though his visit carried an unspoken layer of old friendship beneath its official purpose. Boone and Earl had known each other for over 4 decades, their friendship forged through decades of small-town life, shared hardships, and mutual respect. They sat together on the front porch as evening settled over the farm, the sky painted in soft shades of purple and orange. "Wanted to update you both personally," Boone said, his tone carrying genuine concern. "We've got several witness statements now regarding the incident at the market. Enough to move forward with formal charges against young Ashford, if that's the direction you want to take." Wren, sitting quietly nearby, considered this carefully. "What would that actually accomplish?" she asked honestly, "beyond making things more tense between our families?" Boone studied her thoughtfully, respecting the maturity behind her question. "Legally, it would establish a formal record," he explained. "Practically speaking, given the Ashford family's resources and local influence, it might result in a fine, possibly some community service, but likely not much beyond that, at least not immediately. Then it seems like more trouble than it's worth." "For now," Wren said slowly, "I'd rather focus our energy on protecting the farm and helping our neighbors who are facing similar pressure." Boone nodded slowly, respecting her decision, though his expression remained troubled. "I'll be honest with you both," he said quietly. "I'm concerned this situation is far from over. Warren Ashford doesn't strike me as a man who backs down easily, especially not when significant money and timelines are involved." "We're aware," Earl said grimly. "We've been documenting everything, speaking with Eleanor Voss, gathering information from other affected families." Boone's expression shifted with interest at that. "Eleanor Voss," he repeated. "She's sharp. If anyone can help build a solid case against improper business practices, it's her." He paused thoughtfully before continuing. "There's something else I should mention," he said carefully. "An old friend of mine, Franklin Beaumont, retired deputy, mentioned something interesting to me earlier today regarding an incident at the feed store." Wren's attention sharpened slightly at that. "What did he say?" she asked carefully. "Just that you handled a difficult situation with remarkable composure," Boone said, studying her closely. "Said it reminded him of professional de-escalation training the kind law enforcement officers receive. Struck him as unusual for someone your age, without that kind of formal background." Wren felt her pulse quicken slightly, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. "I've just always been good under pressure, I suppose," she said, carefully, deflecting without directly lying. Boone studied her a moment longer, something knowing and perhaps a little protective in his gaze, before letting the subject drop, respecting whatever privacy she seemed to be maintaining. "Well," he said, rising from his chair, "whatever the reason, it's a good trait to have, especially given everything happening around here lately." As Boone prepared to leave, his expression grew serious once more. "Earl, Wren," he said, "please be careful, both of you. I don't like the direction this situation seems to be heading. If anything happens, anything at all, you call me immediately, day or night. Understood?" "Understood," Earl agreed firmly, shaking his old friend's hand. Wren nodded as well, though privately she suspected Boone's warning was more prescient than any of them yet realized. Later that night, alone in her room, Wren sat by her window, looking out over the darkened fields stretching toward the horizon. The events of the past several days weighed heavily on her mind. The slap, the ruined hat, now carefully repaired and resting once more on its hook by the door. The threatening letter, its 7-day deadline steadily counting down. The stories from Miss Opal and presumably other families throughout the county, all facing similar quiet intimidation. And beneath it all, her own carefully guarded secret, the years of disciplined training with Gideon Marsh, still hidden from most of the world, though apparently not quite as invisible as she had believed. Given Franklin Beaumont's sharp observation earlier that day, she thought about her parents, wondering what advice they might offer if they were still here. Her father had always believed deeply in fairness, in standing up for what was right, regardless of personal cost. Her mother had possessed a quiet strength of her own, the kind that did not need loud declarations to be felt deeply by everyone around her. Wren liked to believe she carried pieces of both of them within her, her father's unwavering sense of justice and her mother's steady, quiet resilience. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever Warren Ashford and his son intended next, Wren felt a growing certainty settling within her. She would not run. She would not simply hand over 60 years of family legacy out of fear. And she would not allow her neighbors, particularly vulnerable people like Miss Opal, to be bullied into submission by wealth and intimidation. Gideon's training had given her physical tools, certainly, but more importantly, it had given her patience, discipline, and the wisdom to know exactly when restraint mattered more than action. That wisdom, she suspected, would prove just as important in the days ahead as any physical skill she possessed. Outside, the night settled quietly over Cedar Hollow, stars scattered brightly across the clear autumn sky, the whole town seemingly peaceful and undisturbed. But beneath that peaceful surface, tension continued building steadily, like pressure gathering before a storm. 7 days had become 4, and somewhere across town, in the sleek offices of Ashford Land Holdings, Warren Ashford was already planning his next move, one considerably less public and considerably more dangerous than anything his son had attempted at the market. 2 nights later, Wren was jolted awake by the frantic barking of their farm dog, Duke, echoing loudly from outside. She sat up immediately, every instinct honed by years of training snapping instantly to full alertness. Earl's bedroom door opened down the hallway simultaneously, his own senses equally alert despite his age. "Wren," he called quietly. "You hear that?" "I'm up," she replied, already pulling on her boots, grabbing a flashlight from her nightstand. They met in the hallway, moving quickly but carefully toward the front door, Duke's frantic barking continuing steadily from somewhere near the livestock pens. Stepping outside into the cold night air, they discovered the source of Duke's alarm immediately. The gate to the main pasture stood wide open, several of their cattle already wandering loose near the property's edge, dangerously close to the main road. "Oh no," Earl muttered, hurrying forward despite his age, adrenaline temporarily overriding his usual careful pace. Wren moved quickly alongside him, scanning the darkness carefully with her flashlight, noting immediately that the gate latch appeared deliberately broken, not simply worn or accidentally left open. "Grandpa," she called urgently, "help me get them back before they reach the road." Together, they worked quickly and efficiently, years of farm experience guiding their movements even in the chaotic darkness, gradually herding the frightened, confused cattle back through the broken gate and into the relative safety of the pasture. By the time they finished, both were breathing hard, adrenaline slowly fading, replaced by a deepening sense of unease. Earl knelt down, examining the broken latch carefully by flashlight. "This wasn't an accident," he said grimly. "Look here, someone cut through the metal deliberately." Wren crouched beside him, examining the clean, precise cut marks along the latch mechanism. "You're right," she agreed quietly. "This was done on purpose." They both stood slowly, scanning the darkened property around them carefully, though whoever had caused the damage was clearly long gone by now. "This is exactly the kind of thing that happened to the Petrov family," Earl said quietly, anger tightening his voice. "Small acts of sabotage, easily dismissed individually as accidents or bad luck, but consistent enough over time to wear a family down." Wren nodded slowly, her jaw tightening with quiet determination. "We need to document this properly," she said. "Photographs, detailed notes, exact timing. And Grandpa, I think it's time we consider installing security cameras around the property." "Cameras cost money we don't exactly have to spare right now," Earl said tiredly. "I'll find a way," Wren said firmly. "This can't continue unanswered." They spent the remainder of the night carefully documenting the damage, taking photographs by flashlight, examining the property perimeter for any additional signs of tampering or intrusion. Though they found no further immediate damage, the message from whoever had visited their property that night felt unmistakably clear. This was only the beginning. The following morning, exhausted from the disrupted night, Wren nonetheless rose early, determined to research affordable security camera options before heading to her morning classes. While researching, an unexpected call came through on her phone from an unfamiliar number. She answered cautiously. "Hello, Wren Halloway," an unfamiliar voice said calmly. "My name is Diane Ellsworth. I work as a paralegal assisting Eleanor Voss." "Oh, hello," Wren replied, slightly surprised. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," Diane assured her. "Eleanor asked me to reach out directly. She's uncovered something significant regarding Ashford Land Holdings that she believes you and your grandfather should know about immediately." Wren felt her pulse quicken slightly, curiosity and cautious hope mixing together. "What did she find?" she asked. "She'd prefer to explain in person," Diane replied. "Would you and your grandfather be available to meet with her later this afternoon?" "Yes, absolutely," Wren said immediately. "We'll be there." After ending the call, Wren immediately sought out Earl, finding him repairing the damaged pasture gate, his expression still tight with lingering frustration from the previous night's incident. "Grandpa," she called. "Eleanor Voss just had her assistant call. She's found something important about Ashford Land Holdings. She wants to meet us this afternoon." Earl straightened immediately, setting down his tools, renewed determination replacing his earlier fatigue. "Well then," he said, "let's not keep her waiting." That afternoon, Earl and Wren returned to Eleanor Voss's small office above the hardware store, finding her waiting with a thick folder spread open across her desk, her expression carrying a mixture of grim satisfaction and serious concern. "Thank you both for coming so quickly," Eleanor said, gesturing for them to sit. "Your assistant mentioned you found something significant," Earl said, settling into his chair. "I did," Eleanor confirmed. "Something quite significant indeed." She slid several documents across the desk toward them. "I've spent the past several days researching Ashford Land Holdings business practices more thoroughly," she explained. "Property records, county filings, business registrations, that sort of thing." Wren examined the documents carefully, though much of the legal language remained somewhat unclear to her. "What exactly are we looking at?" she asked. "Property acquisitions," Eleanor explained. "Over the past 3 years, Ashford Land Holdings has acquired no fewer than 7 different agricultural properties throughout this county, each one following a remarkably similar pattern. Threatening letters citing vague zoning or code violations, tight deadlines, and eventual below-market value purchases from families too frightened or financially unable to fight back properly." 7 families, Earl repeated, shaking his head slowly. "I had no idea it was that many." "Most families don't realize they're not alone," Eleanor said. "Isolation is precisely how intimidation tactics like this succeed. Each family believes their situation is unique, an unfortunate but isolated dispute, rather than recognizing the larger, coordinated pattern happening across the entire county." She pulled out another document, this one considerably more technical. "But here's what's particularly interesting," she continued. "I cross-referenced several of these zoning complaints with actual county records. In at least 4 cases, the specific code violations cited in Ashford's letters do not correspond to any legitimate, documented violations on file with the county planning office." "Meaning what, exactly?" Wren asked. "Meaning," Eleanor said carefully, "that Ashford Land Holdings appears to be fabricating legal justifications entirely, threatening families with violations that simply do not exist in order to pressure them into selling quickly and quietly." Earl's expression darkened considerably. "That's fraud," he said. "Isn't it?" "Potentially, yes," Eleanor confirmed. "Though proving intentional fraud legally requires substantial additional evidence, clear documentation showing deliberate misrepresentation, rather than simple administrative error." "How do we get that kind of evidence?" Wren asked. Eleanor considered the question carefully. "Patience primarily," she said. "Continued documentation from affected families. Possibly, eventually, testimony from someone directly involved with Ashford Land Holdings' internal operations, someone willing to confirm these tactics were deliberate and coordinated, rather than simple mistakes." "That sounds difficult to obtain," Earl observed. It is, Eleanor agreed. Men like Warren Ashford surround themselves carefully, ensuring loyalty through financial dependence and fear. Finding someone willing to speak honestly against him will require considerable patience, and likely considerable courage from whoever eventually comes forward. Wren sat with this information for a long moment, her mind already working through possibilities. What about Colt? She asked slowly. His son. He's young, prone to speaking carelessly when he's angry or has been drinking. Might he unintentionally reveal something useful? Eleanor studied her thoughtfully. Possibly, she said carefully, though relying on that alone would be risky and potentially dangerous, given his demonstrated temper. I'm not planning anything reckless, Wren assured her, just considering all possible avenues. Eleanor nodded slowly, respecting her caution. For now, she said, let's continue building our case carefully and methodically. Document everything. Speak quietly with other affected families, encouraging them to do the same. Patience and thorough preparation will serve us far better than any hasty action. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor's expression grew serious once more. One more thing, she said. Given what happened at your property last night, the cut gate, the loose cattle, please be extremely careful going forward. Whoever is responsible, whether directly connected to Ashford or simply opportunistic vandals taking advantage of local tension, this situation is escalating. Trust your instincts, and don't hesitate to contact Sheriff Whitaker immediately if anything else occurs. We will, Earl promised firmly. As they left Eleanor's office and walked slowly back toward their truck, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across Main Street, Wren felt a complicated mixture of emotions settling over her. Anger, certainly, at the injustice being inflicted upon her family and neighbors, but also, cautiously, a renewed sense of hope, knowing they were no longer facing this fight entirely alone. Eleanor Voss believed in their case. Sheriff Whitaker remained a trusted ally. Gideon Marsh continued offering quiet wisdom and guidance. And somewhere, within herself, Wren felt her own quiet strength continuing to grow, tempered carefully by patience and restraint, exactly as Gideon had always taught her. Whatever Warren Ashford and his son intended next, Wren felt increasingly confident that Cedar Hollow, and the Halloway family in particular, would not go down without a fight. But she also understood, with growing certainty, that the true test of everything she had learned still lay ahead of her. Back at Ashford Land Holdings, tension of a different kind was building steadily. Warren Ashford sat alone in his office late that evening, reviewing financial documents with growing frustration. The 7-day deadline he had imposed on the Halloway family, along with several other pending acquisitions throughout the county, was rapidly approaching, yet resistance was mounting in ways he had not anticipated. His phone rang, interrupting his frustrated review of the paperwork. Ashford, he answered curtly. Warren, it's Marcus, came the voice on the other end, one of his business partners and primary investors. We need to discuss the timeline on the Cedar Hollow acquisitions. My investors are growing impatient. I'm aware, Warren said tightly. There have been some minor complications. Complications, Marcus repeated skeptically. I'm hearing rumors, Warren. Rumors about lawyers, documentation, families comparing notes with each other. This was supposed to be simple. It will be simple, Warren said firmly, though his own confidence felt somewhat shaken. Give me a few more days. You said 7 days initially, Marcus reminded him sharply. That deadline is almost up. My investors need confirmation these properties will be secured and secured quietly, without unnecessary legal complications or public scrutiny. You'll have your confirmation, Warren said, forcing confidence back into his voice. I'm handling it personally. After ending the call, Warren sat alone in his office for a long moment, jaw tight with barely controlled frustration. His son's reckless behavior at the market had already created unwanted public attention. Now, apparently, the Halloway family and their neighbors were organizing resistance more effectively than he had anticipated. He needed a different approach, something more decisive, more effective at ensuring compliance without further public complications. Reaching for his phone again, he dialed a different number entirely, one he rarely used, reserved specifically for situations requiring more delicate, less public handling. It's Ashford, he said, once the call connected. I need something handled quietly and quickly. The voice on the other end responded briefly, professionally. The Halloway property out on County Road 9, Warren continued. I need this situation resolved before the end of the week, one way or another. He listened briefly to the response before answering firmly. I don't care how, he said coldly. Just make sure it's handled quietly and make sure it works. Ending the call, Warren Ashford leaned back in his expensive leather chair, staring out at the darkened town below his office window, Cedar Hollow's quiet streets utterly unaware of the storm quietly gathering above them. Whatever plan he had just set into motion, it was clear that the coming days would bring challenges far more serious than a broken pasture gate or scattered cattle. The true test for Wren Halloway, for her grandfather, and for the entire town of Cedar Hollow was only just beginning. As night fell once more over the Halloway farm, Wren stood quietly on the front porch, watching the stars slowly emerge across the clear autumn sky. Duke rested calmly at her feet now, his earlier alarm long since settled, though Wren remained watchful, alert to every small sound carried on the cool night breeze. Inside, she could hear her grandfather moving quietly through the kitchen, preparing for bed. Despite the tension still lingering from recent events, Wren thought again about everything Marshadian taught her over the years. Patience, discipline, restraint, and the careful, deliberate use of strength only when absolutely necessary. She thought about her parents, wondering, as she often did, what guidance they might offer if they were still here to see everything unfolding around their beloved family farm. She thought about Miss Opal, frightened and alone, and about the other families throughout the county who had already lost their land to fear and intimidation. And she thought, finally, about Colt Ashford and the strange, unsettling certainty she felt deep within herself that their confrontation at the market had been merely the opening moment of something far larger, far more dangerous, still waiting to unfold. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Wren felt increasingly certain of one thing. She would face them with the same quiet strength her parents had instilled in her from childhood, the same disciplined patience Gideon Marsh had carefully cultivated over 4 years of dedicated training, and the same fierce, protective love for her family, her farm, and her community that had defined her entire life so far. Cedar Hollow was her home. These fields, this farmhouse, this quiet, hard-working community, all of it represented everything she held most dear in the world. And Wren Halloway, despite her quiet, unassuming exterior, was prepared to protect all of it, with everything she had, if it came down to that. The 7-day deadline continued ticking steadily toward its conclusion. Somewhere across town, Warren Ashford's carefully orchestrated plans continued moving forward in the shadows, unseen and unsuspected. And somewhere within Wren Halloway herself, 4 years of careful, disciplined training waited patiently, ready, if truly necessary, to finally reveal themselves fully to a town that had, until now, only ever seen the quiet farm girl working hard beneath a wide-brimmed straw hat. But that revelation, and everything it would bring with it, still waited just beyond the horizon. For now the night remained calm, the stars bright overhead, and the Halloway farm stood quiet and peaceful beneath the vast autumn sky, unaware entirely of exactly how much was about to change in the coming days. 2 mornings later, Wren drove into town earlier than usual, before her first class, wanting to check on Miss Opal before the day got busy. The road to Opal's place ran along a low ridge, lined with oaks just beginning to turn gold. Wren liked that drive. It gave her a few quiet minutes to think. Windows cracked, radio off, just the sound of tires on gravel and wind moving through the trees. She found Opal in her garden, kneeling slowly beside a row of late tomatoes, her movements careful and a little unsteady. "Miss Opal," Wren called gently, so as not to startle her. "Let me help you up." Opal looked up, relief crossing her face when she saw who it was. "Wren, honey, you didn't need to come all this way." "I wanted to," Wren said simply, kneeling beside her and gathering the last of the ripe tomatoes into a basket. They worked together for a while in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who trust each other completely. Those men came by again, Opal said eventually, her voice quieter now. Yesterday afternoon. Wren's hands stilled over the basket. What did they want this time? Same as before, Opal said. Papers to sign. Said if I didn't sign by Friday, they'd have to, and I quote, involve the county on the matter. That's tomorrow, Wren said, doing the math quickly in her head. I know, Opal said, and for the first time, Wren heard real fear in the old woman's voice. Not just worry, but fear. I don't have anybody else, Wren. My children are 3 states away. I don't have the money for a lawyer of my own. You don't need your own, Wren said firmly. Eleanor Voss is already looking into all of this. You're part of it now, whether you signed anything with her or not. We're not going to let them push you off this land. Opal reached over and took Wren's hand, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman her age. Your grandfather raised you right, she said. Your mother would be so proud watching you do this. Wren felt the familiar ache rise in her chest at the mention of her mother, but she let it settle rather than push it away, the way Gideon had taught her to do with pain she could not control. I think about her a lot these days, Wren admitted quietly, wondering what she'd say about all this. I can tell you exactly what she'd say, Opal said, smiling faintly. She'd say stand your ground and take care of your neighbors while you're at it. That woman never once walked past somebody in trouble without stopping to help. Wren smiled at that, the ache easing into something warmer. Sounds about right, she said. Before leaving, Wren helped Opal carry the tomatoes inside, checked the locks on her doors and windows out of quiet habit, and promised to come back the next day, before the Friday deadline arrived. You call me, Wren said, if anyone comes by again. Any time, day or night. Promise me. I promise, Opal said, squeezing her hand once more. Thank you, sweetheart. Driving away from Opal's property, Wren felt something settle more firmly inside her. A resolve that had been building slowly over the past several days, finally taking clear shape. This was never only about her family's land. It had never only been about a slap at a Saturday market, or a torn straw hat, or even a threatening letter with a 7-day deadline. It was about an old woman kneeling in her garden, afraid of losing the only home she had left. It was about a whole county of quiet, hard-working families who had spent their lives asking for nothing more than to be left alone to tend their land in peace. And it was about a town that had, for too long, let fear decide what kind of place it was going to be. Wren did not know yet exactly how this would end. She did not know what Warren Ashford was planning behind the closed doors of his office, or what his son might do next in his wounded pride. But she knew, with a certainty that settled deep into her bones, that she was not going to spend the coming days standing still, waiting for whatever came next to simply happen to her. She intended to meet it, calmly if she could, firmly, always. And if it ever truly came down to it, with everything Gideon Marsh had spent 4 quiet years teaching her. That evening, back at the farmhouse, Earl noticed the change in his granddaughter almost immediately. She moved through her evening chores with the same quiet efficiency as always. But there was something steadier in her now, something that had not been there even a few days earlier. You've got that look, he said, watching her from the porch as she latched the newly repaired pasture gate for the night. What look? Wren asked, walking back toward the house. The look your grandmother used to get, Earl said, right before she decided something important. And there wasn't a single soul in the county who could talk her out of it. Wren allowed herself a small smile at that. Maybe I've decided something, she admitted. Care to share it with an old man? She sat down on the porch step beside him, looking out over the darkening fields, the same fields her great-grandfather had cleared with his own hands 3 generations earlier. I've decided we're not just protecting our farm anymore, she said slowly. We're protecting everybody Ashford's been quietly bullying this whole time. Miss Opal, the Delacroix family, anybody else out there too scared or too tired to fight back alone. Earl studied her for a long moment, pride and worry mingling in his weathered expression, the same combination she had seen in him so often since her parents had passed. That's a heavy thing to carry, Wren, he said gently, taking on a fight that big. I know, she said, but I don't think I have much choice, not really. Not if I want to be able to look at myself in the mirror when this is all over. Earl reached over and rested a hand gently on her shoulder, the same gesture he had used to comfort her since she was a small girl, sitting on this very porch, learning to shell peas beside her grandmother. Your parents would be proud of you, he said, quietly. I hope you know that. Not because you're strong enough to fight, though you are, but because you never forget who you're fighting for. Wren leaned her head, briefly, against her grandfather's shoulder, taking comfort in the familiar warmth of him, the steady, unwavering presence he had been for her through every hard season of the past 3 years. I love you, Grandpa, she said quietly. Love you too, kid, Earl said, his voice a little rougher than usual. Now get inside before you catch a chill. We've got an early morning ahead of us, same as always. Wren rose, pausing at the door to look back once more, at the fields stretching out into darkness, the barn silhouetted against the last purple light of dusk, the whole quiet, familiar world she had spent her entire life within. 4 days remained until Warren Ashford's deadline arrived. 4 days until whatever he had truly set in motion finally revealed itself. Wren did not know exactly what those 4 days would bring, but she walked inside that night, steady, clear-headed, and entirely unafraid, carrying with her every lesson her parents, her grandfather, and Gideon Marsh had spent her whole life quietly teaching her. Whatever came next, Cedar Hollow was about to discover exactly what kind of strength had been growing, quietly and patiently, on that small farm at the edge of town all along. 4 days remained until Warren Ashford's deadline, then 3, then 2. Time has a strange way of moving in small towns, slow enough that you notice every sunrise, fast enough that deadlines still arrive before you're ready. Wren Halloway felt every single one of those days pressing down on her. Not just the deadline on the letter, something heavier than that, something she couldn't quite name yet. She kept working. She kept training with Gideon before dawn. She kept checking on Miss Opal every single afternoon, and she kept waiting for whatever was coming next, because deep down, she knew something was coming. The town of Cedar Hollow held a harvest festival every year, on the Friday before the deadline fell that year. It was tradition, older than most people in town could remember. There were pie contests and a small band playing on a wooden stage. There were games for the little ones, hay rides, and a bonfire once the sun went down. Almost the whole town showed up. It was supposed to be a night of comfort, a night to forget about hard seasons and hard news for a while. Wren almost didn't go. She had chores and worry and 100 reasons to stay home. But Earl convinced her otherwise. Life doesn't stop just because trouble's knocking, he said. Your grandmother taught me that. Go, breathe a little. We'll face tomorrow when it comes. So she went. She wore a simple flannel jacket, her hair loose for once, and yes, her father's straw hat, freshly repaired. For an hour or two, it almost felt normal again. She helped Ruthie Colson set up the dessert table. She laughed quietly at something Harold Fenwick said about his tomato plants. She even danced once, briefly, with an old family friend, the fiddle music carrying warm and bright over the crowd. For a little while, it felt like the world hadn't changed at all. Then Colt Ashford showed up. He wasn't supposed to be there. Word around town was that Warren had ordered him to stay away from anything involving the Halloway family. But pride doesn't listen well to orders, especially not wounded pride. Colt arrived with Dean and Cody trailing behind him, all 3 of them a little too loud, a little too confident. Wren noticed him the moment he stepped into the firelight. She didn't react outwardly. She simply kept helping Ruthie arrange pies on the table, her senses quietly sharpening the way they always did now, whenever danger walked into a room. For a while Colt kept his distance. He talked with a few old classmates near the bonfire. He drank from a flask he wasn't supposed to have at a family event. Wren watched him carefully from across the square, without ever seeming to watch him at all. That was a skill Gideon had drilled into her for years. Awareness without obvious attention. See everything. Show nothing. She hoped quietly that the night would simply pass without incident. But hope, as she'd learned more than once in her short life, doesn't always get the final say. It happened near the hay maze, close to 9 that evening. Wren had stepped away from the main crowd for a moment, walking toward her truck to grab an extra blanket for Miss Opal, who was starting to feel the evening chill. Colt intercepted her path, stepping out from the shadows near the parked cars, Dean and Cody a few steps behind him. Well, look who it is, Colt said, his words slightly slurred. Farm girl, out here all alone. Wren stopped walking, keeping a calm, measured distance between them. Colt, she said evenly, I don't want any trouble tonight. Course you don't, he said, stepping closer. You never want trouble. Real convenient, isn't it? Letting your grandpa's lawyer do all your fighting for you. I'm going to walk away now, Wren said quietly. You should think about doing the same. Colt laughed, though there was no real humor in it. Still giving orders, he muttered. Even after everything. He reached out, grabbing her arm roughly. Not hard enough to truly hurt her, but hard enough to be seen. Hard enough to be recorded. Because Dean, standing a few feet away, already had his phone raised, filming quietly. Let go of me, Wren said firmly, her voice carrying just enough volume to draw a few curious glances from nearby festival goers. Or what? Colt sneered. For one long moment, everything in Wren's body prepared to respond. Every year of training screamed at her to act. She could have freed herself in half a second. She could have put him on the ground, before he even understood what happened. Instead, she simply twisted her arm at the correct angle, breaking his grip cleanly, calmly, without striking him at all. It was a defensive movement, not an offensive one. Textbook Krav Maga, controlled and precise. To anyone watching without context, it might have looked, for one brief instant, like she had pushed him. Colt stumbled backward slightly, more from surprise than force, catching himself against a nearby fence post. She attacked me, he said loudly, suddenly, dramatically, playing to the small crowd that had gathered. Everybody saw it. She attacked me. Wren stood perfectly still, breathing steady, hands open at her sides. I defended myself, she said clearly, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. He grabbed me first. But the damage in that moment had already been done, because Dean's phone was still recording. And Dean, with a nervous glance toward Colt, quietly stopped filming, pocketing his phone before anyone thought to ask him to share the footage honestly, in full context. The festival's mood shifted instantly. Whispers spread through the crowd like sparks jumping from the bonfire. Ruthie hurried over, placing a protective hand on Wren's shoulder. What happened here? She asked firmly. He grabbed her arm, an older woman nearby confirmed. I saw it clearly. The girl only defended herself. But not everyone had seen clearly. And in a small town, perception often moves faster than truth ever can. Colt, playing up his supposed injury with theatrical exaggeration, limped slightly as Dean and Cody helped steady him. I think my wrist is hurt, he said loudly, ensuring everyone nearby heard him clearly. Earl arrived, moments later, having heard the commotion from across the square, his expression darkening the instant he understood what had happened. Enough, he said firmly, stepping between Wren and Colt. This event is over for you three. Leave now. Colt smirked faintly despite his supposed pain. We're leaving, he said, but this isn't over. As the three young men walked away, Dean glanced back once toward Wren, something uneasy flickering across his expression. Quickly hidden, Wren noticed it. She filed it away carefully, a small detail that might matter later. By the next morning, the damage had spread far beyond the festival itself. A short video clip, carefully edited, had appeared online overnight, shared quietly at first through group messages, then more widely across local social media pages. The clip showed only a few seconds. Colt reaching toward Wren. Wren's sudden, sharp movement. Colt stumbling backward, clutching his wrist. It cut off before showing his hand gripping her arm first. It cut off before showing his own aggressive advance. Context, carefully removed, twisted an act of self-defense into something that looked, to unfamiliar eyes, like an unprovoked attack. By mid-morning, the whispers around Cedar Hollow had shifted considerably. Did you see that video? People murmured at the diner counter. That Halloway girl's got quite a temper, apparently. Wonder what else she's capable of. A girl who can move like that. Maybe there's more to that whole story than we realized. Fear, once again, proved far more persuasive than truth. Sheriff Boone Whitaker arrived at the farm just after breakfast, his expression heavy with reluctance. Wren, he said quietly, standing awkwardly on the porch. I need you to come down to the station with me. What for? Earl demanded, stepping protectively beside his granddaughter. There's been a formal complaint filed, Boone explained carefully, against Wren, regarding last night's incident. I've seen the video circulating. I don't believe it tells the full story, but given the complaint, and given how quickly this has spread through town, I don't have much choice but to bring her in for questioning. Wren nodded slowly, steadying herself. It's all right, Grandpa, she said quietly. I'll go. I haven't done anything wrong. I know that, Earl said firmly. And so does Boone. This is just noise. We'll sort it out. Boone met Earl's eyes with quiet apology. I'm sorry it's come to this, he said. I truly am. The drive into town felt longer than usual. Wren sat quietly in the back of Boone's patrol car, watching the familiar fields pass by outside the window, her mind steady despite the unfair weight settling over her. At the small station, Boone led her gently into a plain interview room. Offering coffee, she politely declined. I have to ask you some questions, he said, formally for the record. But off the record, Wren, I want you to know I don't believe for 1 second you attacked that boy without cause. Thank you, Wren said quietly. I appreciate that. She answered his questions honestly and clearly, describing exactly what had happened. Colt's grip on her arm, her defensive response, nothing more. Boone listened carefully, taking careful notes. The video making the rounds online, he said eventually, it's been edited. Anyone with half an eye for detail can see the cut right before he grabs you. Can that be proven? Wren asked. I'm working on it, Boone said. I've requested the full, unedited footage from anyone who filmed the incident. So far, nobody's come forward willingly. Wren considered this for a moment. Dean Prescott was filming, she said. I saw him clearly. Boone nodded slowly. I suspected as much, he said. I'll speak with him directly. Just then, the station door opened, and Eleanor Voss walked in briskly, her expression sharp and determined. I heard what happened, she said immediately. Wren, you don't say another word without me present, understood? She's already answered, honestly, Boone said. Nothing improper here, Eleanor. I'm sure, Eleanor said, though her tone remained firm. But given everything else happening around this family lately, I'm not taking any chances. Boone sighed, though a small measure of respect flickered in his expression. Understood, he said. For what it's worth, I don't intend to hold Wren any longer than absolutely necessary. This whole situation smells more like manipulation than genuine complaint. We agree on that much, Eleanor said. While Wren sat waiting at the station, events at the Halloway farm took a far darker turn. Colt Ashford, still nursing wounded pride and a flask of whiskey since mid-afternoon, made a decision that would prove to be the most serious mistake of his young life. He drove out toward the Halloway property alone, without Dean or Cody this time, his anger fueled by alcohol and humiliation. Earl was alone at the farm, tending quietly to evening chores, unaware of the approaching danger. Colt's truck came to a reckless stop near the front gate, gravel spraying loudly across the driveway. Earl turned, immediately recognizing the vehicle, his weathered face hardening with concern. You need to leave, Earl said firmly, standing his ground despite his age. Now, Colt stumbled slightly as he climbed out, his eyes unfocused, his movements unsteady. Where's she at? He demanded loudly. Your granddaughter. Thinks she's tough, embarrassing me in front of the whole town. She's not here, Earl said calmly, though his heart raced beneath his composed exterior. You need to go home, son. Sleep it off. Don't call me son, Colt snapped, advancing further onto the property. You people think you're better than us. Think you can just say no to my daddy, humiliate me in front of everybody. Nobody's trying to humiliate you, Earl said carefully, positioning himself between Colt and the farmhouse. You've done that all on your own tonight. Colt's face twisted with sudden fury at those words. He shoved Earl hard, unexpectedly, sending the older man stumbling backward, losing his footing on the uneven ground. Earl fell hard, his shoulder striking the fence post, a sharp cry of pain escaping him despite his effort to stay composed. Grandpa, a voice called out suddenly from across the yard. Miss Opal Kessler, who had come by earlier that evening to drop off a jar of preserves, had witnessed the entire confrontation from the porch, her elderly hands trembling as she hurried forward. You leave him alone, she said sharply, positioning her frail body protectively near Earl. You've done enough harm already, young man. Colt, disoriented by alcohol and anger, turned his attention toward her instead, something dangerous and unpredictable in his unsteady gaze. Stay out of this, old woman, he snapped. I most certainly will not, Opal said firmly, though fear was evident beneath her brave words. For one terrifying moment, it seemed as though Colt might advance further, his anger completely untethered now from any rational restraint. But then, headlights swept suddenly across the driveway, Wren had been released just 20 minutes earlier, Eleanor successfully arguing that no formal charges could reasonably proceed without the full unedited footage. Driving home immediately afterward, worry gnawing steadily at her, Wren had felt an unshakable sense that something was deeply wrong. She arrived just as Colt turned toward Opal, his posture tense and threatening. Wren was out of her truck and across the yard before conscious thought even fully registered her actions. Years of disciplined training finally, fully awakening within her. "Colt," she said sharply, her voice cutting cleanly through the tense night air. "Step away from them now." Colt spun toward her, surprise and renewed anger flashing across his face. "You," he snarled. "Course you'd show up right when I'm finally getting somewhere." "Step away," Wren repeated, calm but absolutely firm, positioning herself protectively between Colt and her grandfather, still recovering on the ground, and Opal, trembling but resolute beside him. "Or what?" Colt spat, stepping closer, clearly beyond reasoning now. "You gonna hit me again in front of witnesses this time?" "I'm asking you one more time," Wren said steadily. "Leave now." Colt, emboldened by alcohol and desperation, lunged forward suddenly, reaching for her. This time there was no ambiguity, no context that could later be edited or misrepresented. Wren moved with precise, controlled efficiency, redirecting his momentum cleanly, using his own aggressive advance against him, bringing him firmly, safely, but unmistakably to the ground, pinning his arm securely without causing serious injury. "Stay down," she said quietly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Please, just stay down." Colt struggled briefly, then, realizing the futility of continued resistance, went still beneath her controlled hold. His earlier bravado completely evaporated, replaced by genuine fear and confusion. "How?" he muttered, breathless. "How'd you do that?" "Training," Wren said simply. "Years of it. Something I hoped I'd never have to actually use." What none of them realized in that tense, chaotic moment was that the entire confrontation, from Colt's initial arrival to this very instant, had been captured clearly on a small security camera Earl had quietly installed near the barn just days earlier, following the earlier incident with the cut pasture gate. The footage, currently recording onto a small storage device with limited capacity, would only hold approximately 12 more hours of recorded material before automatically overwriting itself. 12 hours to preserve undeniable proof of exactly what had truly happened that night. 12 hours that would soon prove absolutely critical. But in that immediate moment, none of them were thinking about cameras or evidence. Wren released Colt carefully once his resistance fully subsided, stepping back cautiously, watching him closely as he slowly sat up, disoriented and shaken. "Grandpa," she said urgently, turning her attention immediately toward Earl. "Are you all right?" Earl, wincing slightly, allowed her to help him carefully to his feet. "I'm fine," he said, though his shoulder clearly pained him. "Bruised, not broken, I'll manage." "Miss Opal," Wren continued, turning toward the elderly woman, still trembling from the tense encounter. "I'm all right, dear," Opal said, though her voice shook slightly. "Just shaken up." Colt, still sitting on the ground, stared up at Wren with an expression that had shifted entirely, fear and confusion replacing his earlier arrogance completely. "You could have really hurt me," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Couldn't you?" "Yes," Wren said honestly, meeting his eyes steadily. "I could have, but that was never what I wanted." Something shifted subtly in Colt's expression at those words, a flicker of genuine reflection breaking briefly through his usual bravado. "Why didn't you?" he asked quietly. "Because hurting you wouldn't fix anything," Wren said simply. "It would just make me exactly the kind of person you've been treating me like this whole time. I'm not interested in becoming that." Colt sat with that for a long, silent moment, something clearly shifting within him, though old habits of pride quickly began reasserting themselves once the initial shock faded. "This isn't over," he muttered, stumbling to his feet unsteadily. "My father's not gonna let this go." "Your father," Wren said calmly, "is the one who should be worried right now, not you." Colt hesitated, something uncertain flickering across his face, before finally turning and stumbling back toward his truck, driving away unsteadily into the darkness. Once he was gone, the adrenaline that had carried Wren through the confrontation began finally to fade, leaving her hands trembling slightly as she helped her grandfather inside. "You did good, kid," Earl said quietly, settling carefully into his usual kitchen chair, wincing again as Wren gently examined his bruised shoulder. "Real good. I should have been here sooner," Wren said, guilt tightening her voice. "If I hadn't been at the station, this isn't your fault," Earl interrupted firmly. "None of this is your fault, you hear me? That boy made his own choices tonight. You just made sure nobody got seriously hurt because of them." Miss Opal, seated nearby with a cup of tea, Wren had quickly prepared for her, nodded in firm agreement. "Your grandfather's right," she said. "You saved us both tonight, Wren. I won't forget that." Wren managed a tired, grateful smile, though worry still lingered heavily in her chest. "We need to call Sheriff Whitaker," she said. "Now before anything else happens." "Already ahead of you," Earl said, gesturing toward the phone. Within 20 minutes, Boone Whitaker arrived at the farm, his expression grim as he listened carefully to their account of what had transpired. "This settles it," he said firmly, once they finished explaining. "I'm bringing Colt Ashford in for questioning immediately. Assault, trespassing, harassment. This has gone on long enough." "There's something else you should know," Wren said quietly, remembering suddenly the security camera near the barn. "Grandpa installed a camera a few days ago. It might have caught everything tonight clearly, from start to finish." Boone's expression sharpened with immediate interest. "Show me," he said. They hurried together toward the small equipment shed where Earl had installed the modest recording system, Wren's hands trembling slightly with urgency as she pulled up the footage. There it was, clear and unmistakable. Colt's aggressive arrival, his shove against Earl, his threatening advance toward Opal, and, finally, Wren's controlled, defensive intervention. Clearly protective, clearly justified. "This is exactly what we need," Boone said, relief evident in his voice. "But this storage device, how much longer will it hold this footage?" Wren checked the small display quickly, her stomach tightening with sudden urgency. "Less than 12 hours, she said. "It'll start recording over itself automatically after that." Boone's expression grew immediately serious. "Then we don't have any time to waste," he said firmly. "I need to get this footage properly secured and copied immediately, before anything happens to it." The next several hours passed in tense, careful urgency. Boone personally oversaw the careful extraction and copying of the footage, ensuring proper legal procedure was followed precisely, so the evidence would hold up without question. Eleanor Voss arrived shortly afterward, having been called immediately by Boone, her sharp eyes studying the footage with clear satisfaction once it had been safely secured. "This changes everything," she said firmly. "Clear, unedited evidence of assault, trespassing, and threatening behavior, corroborated by 3 credible witnesses. This is exactly the kind of proof we needed." "What happens now?" Earl asked, still favoring his sore shoulder slightly. "Now," Eleanor said, "Sheriff Whitaker formally arrests Colt Ashford, and given his father's clear involvement in pressuring multiple families throughout this county, I intend to use this incident as leverage to finally bring everything else into the light as well." Wren listened carefully, a complicated mixture of relief and continued worry settling over her. "Will this be enough?" she asked quietly. "To stop Warren Ashford completely, not just Colt?" Eleanor considered the question seriously before answering. "It's a significant step," she said honestly. "Possibly the most significant step yet. But men like Warren Ashford rarely go down easily, even with clear evidence against their family. I suspect he'll fight back hard once he realizes how serious this has become." "Then we'll be ready," Wren said firmly, exhaustion evident in her voice, though her resolve remained unshaken. Boone nodded in firm agreement. "I'll head out now," he said, "and bring Colt and myself. Given tonight's events and this footage, I don't expect much resistance." As Boone prepared to leave, he paused, turning back toward Wren with an expression of genuine respect. "You handled yourself remarkably tonight," he said. "Controlled, restrained, exactly enough force and not 1 ounce more. That's not something most people, regardless of training, manage under real pressure." "I had good teachers," Wren said quietly, thinking briefly of Gideon Marsh and of her parents, whose lessons continued guiding her long after they were gone. Once Boone and Eleanor departed, The farmhouse fell into a heavy, exhausted quiet. Miss Opal insisted on staying the night, rather than returning alone to her own property, and Wren gently prepared the small guest room for her, grateful for the older woman's continued presence despite everything that had happened. Earl, still favoring his sore shoulder, settled slowly into his favorite chair by the fireplace, watching quietly as Wren moved carefully around the kitchen, preparing a simple, comforting meal for the three of them. "You know," Earl said eventually, breaking the comfortable silence, "your grandmother always used to say something whenever hard times came around." "What's that?" Wren asked, glancing up from the stove. "She used to say the true measure of a person isn't found in how they act when everything's easy," Earl said, thoughtfully. "It's found in how they act when everything's hard, and nobody's watching to give them credit for it." Wren considered those words carefully, thinking of the quiet, disciplined restraint she had shown throughout the past several difficult days. "I think I understand that better now than I ever have before," she said softly. Miss Opal, seated nearby, nodded slowly in warm agreement. "You've shown more strength this week than most people show in a lifetime, dear," she said gently. "Not just physical strength either, the harder kind, the kind that chooses patience even when anger would be so much easier." Wren felt her eyes sting slightly at the elderly woman's kind words, gratitude and exhaustion mixing together, as the tension of the day slowly began releasing its grip on her. "Thank you," she said quietly, "both of you, for everything." They shared a simple, quiet meal together that evening, 3 generations bound not by blood alone, but by shared hardship, shared resilience, and a shared commitment to protecting one another, regardless of personal cost. Outside, the night settled peacefully over the farm once more, the earlier chaos and danger finally, temporarily, at rest. But everyone gathered around that small kitchen table understood clearly that the true resolution of everything happening in Cedar Hollow still remained ahead of them, waiting patiently in the days still to come. Meanwhile, at the county jail, Colt Ashford sat alone in a small holding cell, the reality of his situation slowly sinking through the fog of alcohol and wounded pride. Sheriff Whitaker had brought him in without incident, Colt offering little resistance once confronted directly with the clear security footage. Now, alone in the quiet cell, Colt found himself thinking, perhaps for the first time in his young life, about consequences he could not simply avoid through his father's money or influence. He thought about the look in Wren's eyes as she'd released him from her controlled hold that evening. Not anger, not triumph, just quiet, steady conviction. He thought about her words echoing clearly in his memory. "Hurting you wouldn't fix anything. It would just make me exactly the kind of person you've been treating me like this whole time." For the first time, Colt Ashford began seriously questioning exactly what kind of person he had allowed himself to become, and exactly why. His phone, confiscated upon arrest, sat locked away in evidence, but even without it, he could easily imagine his father's furious reaction once news of his arrest inevitably reached him. Whatever happened next, Colt understood clearly that his comfortable, consequence-free existence had finally, undeniably come to an end. Across town, in his private office, Warren Ashford received the news of his son's arrest with cold, controlled fury. "Get him out," he snapped into his phone, speaking with the private attorney he kept on constant retainer. "Immediately, whatever it costs." "It's not that simple," the attorney explained carefully. "The evidence against him is substantial, Warren. Clear video footage, multiple witnesses, including an elderly woman and a well-respected local farmer." "I don't care about complications," Warren said sharply. "I care about results. Handle it." After ending the call, Warren stood silently for a long moment, staring out at the darkened town below his office window, his earlier plans rapidly unraveling in ways he had never anticipated. The Halloway family and their unexpected alliance with half the county's affected farmers had proven far more resilient, far more capable than he had ever imagined possible. And now, with his own son facing serious legal consequences, the careful, controlled image he had spent decades building throughout Cedar Hollow stood suddenly, dangerously exposed. Warren Ashford was not a man accustomed to losing control of a situation, but standing there that night, watching his carefully constructed plans crumble steadily around him. He understood clearly that everything was about to become considerably more complicated and considerably more public than he had ever intended. Whatever came next, one thing had become undeniably clear. The quiet farm girl he and his son had so badly underestimated was not simply going to disappear quietly into the background any longer. She had already proven decisively exactly how wrong that assumption truly was, and Cedar Hollow, slowly but surely, was beginning to notice. 2 days remained until Warren Ashford's deadline. Colt sat in a county holding cell, waiting on formal charges. 5 families had joined Eleanor Voss's case, and somewhere across Cedar Hollow, a very different kind of storm was gathering. Because a man like Warren Ashford does not simply accept defeat. He escalates. He finds new pressure to apply, new angles to work, and that is exactly what he did next. The call came early the following morning, while Wren was still out feeding the goats. Earl answered the farmhouse phone, his expression shifting from calm to tight within seconds. "Slow down," he said. "Say that again." Wren came in from the barn a few minutes later to find her grandfather sitting heavily at the kitchen table, his face pale. "What happened?" she asked immediately. "That was Eleanor," Earl said quietly. "Warren Ashford's lawyer filed something overnight, a restraining order request against you." "Against me," Wren repeated, stunned. "For what?" "Claims you assaulted Colt twice now," Earl said. "Once at the festival, once at the barn. Says you're a danger to his son. Wants a judge to keep you away from him, and wants to push forward with criminal charges of his own." Wren felt something cold settle in her stomach. "But we have the footage," she said. "The footage shows exactly what happened." "I know," Earl said. "Eleanor knows too. She says this isn't really about winning that filing. It's about buying time and about pressure." "What kind of pressure?" Earl hesitated before answering. "There's more," he said quietly. "Warren's lawyer also sent a new letter. Says if we drop everything, refuse to testify, and sign the sale agreement by tomorrow evening, they'll withdraw the restraining order and drop everything against you." Wren sat down slowly across from her grandfather, the weight of the choice settling heavily over the kitchen table between them. "He's trying to trade the farm for my freedom," she said quietly. "That's exactly what he's doing," Earl said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Using fear as a bargaining chip, same as he's done with every other family in this county." They drove into town that afternoon to meet with Eleanor, the tension between them heavy and unspoken during the short trip. Eleanor's office felt smaller than usual, crowded now with case files, witness statements, and the corkboard covered in red thread that had grown considerably since their last visit. "I won't lie to either of you," Eleanor said, once they were seated. "This restraining order filing is weak. Given the footage we have, I doubt it survives a judge's review for more than a day or two." "But weak doesn't mean harmless." "What does it mean then?" Wren asked. "It means Warren Ashford is trying to frighten you into silence before this goes any further," Eleanor explained. "If you and your grandfather withdraw from the case now, sign the sale agreement, and refuse to testify, it significantly weakens what we can prove against him and his company." "And if we don't sign?" Earl asked. "Then we push forward," Eleanor said firmly. "We present the footage. We bring forward the other families. We request a formal hearing before the county board regarding the fabricated code violations. It's the harder path, but it's the honest one." Wren sat with the weight of that choice for a long moment. Sell and Colt's charges quietly disappear, and this fight ends, at least for her family. Or hold firm and risk everything, not just for herself, but for every other family standing beside them. "What would happen to Miss Opal?" she asked quietly. "And the Delacroix family, if we back out now?" Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "Honestly," she said, "it would hurt their case considerably. Your family's testimony and that footage are central pieces of what we've built so far." Wren looked at her grandfather, searching his weathered face for guidance, though she already knew, somewhere deep inside, what her answer needed to be. "We're not selling," she said finally, her voice steady, "and we're not backing out." Earl reached over, squeezing her hand gently, pride evident in his tired eyes. "That's my girl," he said softly. Eleanor nodded, something like quiet respect crossing her sharp features. Then let's get to work, she said. Because if we're doing this, we're doing it properly. And we're doing it before that deadline arrives tomorrow night. That evening, back at the farm, Wren found herself unable to settle, the weight of the coming hours pressing heavily against her thoughts. She drove out to Gideon Marsh's property just before sunset, needing, more than anything, a quiet space to think clearly. Gideon was waiting on his porch, as if he had somehow known she would come. Heard about the restraining order, he said, once she settled into the chair beside him. Word travels fast in a town this size. Feels like everything's happening at once, Wren admitted. The deadline, the hearing, Colt's charges. I don't know if we're doing the right thing anymore. Gideon was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. Do you remember, he said eventually, what I told you, the very first day you came to train with me? You said a lot of things that day, Wren said, managing a small, tired smile. I said I couldn't give you your parents back, Gideon said, but I could make sure that whenever a hard moment came, you wouldn't stand there helpless. Do you remember that? I remember, Wren said softly. This is that moment, Gideon said. Not a physical one this time. A harder one maybe. The kind that tests who you are, not just what you can do with your hands. Wren looked out over the darkening fields, thinking of Miss Opal's trembling hands, of Earl's bruised shoulder, of 5 families sitting together in a crowded office, choosing courage over silence. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Not of Colt, not even really of Warren. I'm scared of what happens if we lose, after everyone's put so much on the line. Gideon nodded slowly, understanding evident in his weathered expression. Fear like that means you understand exactly what's at stake, he said. That's not weakness, Wren. That's wisdom. But wisdom doesn't mean walking away from what's right. It means walking toward it carefully and with your eyes open. He paused, studying her closely. There's something else you should know, he said. Something I probably should have told you sooner. What is it? Wren asked. Gideon took a slow breath before answering. Years back, he said, before I retired out here, I did private security consulting work for various businesses. One of those businesses, briefly, was an early version of Warren Ashford's company, back when it was much smaller. Wren's attention sharpened immediately. What happened? She asked. I trained a small internal security team for him, Gideon said. Basic protective work, nothing unusual. But partway through the contract, I overheard something troubling. Plans to use intimidation tactics against smaller landowners, dressed up carefully as legitimate business negotiations. What did you do? I walked away from the contract immediately, Gideon said. Refused any further work with his company. Warned a few people quietly, where I could without breaking confidentiality agreements too seriously. But I never had solid proof. Nothing that would hold up formally. Wren absorbed this information slowly, pieces of a larger picture settling further into place. Would you testify to that now? She asked carefully. If it came to it. Gideon considered the question seriously, weighing years of careful privacy against the situation now unfolding. Yes, he said finally, I believe I would. It's long past time that man faced real consequences for how he's built his fortune. Wren felt a fresh wave of hope rising through her exhaustion. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything tonight and every day these past 4 years. Gideon reached over, resting a steady hand briefly on her shoulder. You've never needed to thank me, he said. Watching you become the person you are, that's been the honor, Wren, not the other way around. The following morning, the day of the deadline, brought with it a tension that seemed to hang over the entire farm. Earl moved through his usual chores a little slower than normal, his shoulder still healing, though his resolve remained unshaken. Wren spent the morning gathering final documentation for Eleanor, photographs of the barn footage, written statements, careful notes on everything that had transpired over the past several days. Just after noon, an unfamiliar car pulled into the driveway. Warren Ashford himself stepped out, dressed impeccably despite the tension clearly written across his usually composed features. Earl stepped onto the porch immediately, Wren close behind him. You've got some nerve showing up here, Earl said firmly. I came to speak with your granddaughter directly, Warren said, his tone carefully controlled. One final time, before this situation escalates any further than it already has. Say what you need to say, Wren said, standing firm beside her grandfather. Warren studied her for a long moment, something calculating behind his composed expression. I'm prepared to make this very simple, he said. Drop your involvement in Eleanor Voss's case. Refuse to testify. Sign the sale agreement today, at fair market value, not the initial offer. In return, I'll ensure all charges against my son are dropped, and this restraining order matter disappears entirely. And if we refuse? Wren asked steadily. Warren's expression hardened slightly. Then my legal team will make the coming months considerably more difficult for your family, he said. Regardless of what that footage shows, I have resources you cannot begin to match, and patience you clearly underestimate. Wren felt anger rising steadily within her, though she kept her voice calm and level. You've spent this whole time trying to buy silence, she said. Mine, Miss Opal's. Everyone else's. It hasn't worked yet. It's not going to work today either. Warren's jaw tightened, his composed facade cracking slightly. You're a child playing at things you don't understand, he said sharply. I understand plenty, Wren said. I understand you've bullied families out of their homes for years, hiding behind paperwork and threats. I understand your son learned that same cruelty from watching you. And I understand that today, that's finally going to catch up with both of you. For a moment, something flickered across Warren's face. Not quite fear, but something close to it. The first genuine crack in his usual armor of control. You have no idea what you're risking, he said quietly, almost to himself. Neither do you, Wren replied evenly. Not anymore. Warren stood there a moment longer, clearly recalculating, before turning sharply and returning to his car without another word, gravel spraying slightly as he pulled away. Earl let out a slow breath beside her. Well, he said, I suppose that answers that. Guess it does, Wren said, her heart still pounding, though her voice remained steady. That evening, Eleanor called an emergency meeting, gathering everyone involved in the case at the small county community hall, normally reserved for church suppers and town council meetings. Word had spread quickly throughout Cedar Hollow, and by the time Wren and Earl arrived, the hall was already filling steadily with concerned residents, far beyond just the families directly involved in the case. Ruthie Colson was there, along with Harold Fenwick, Sheriff Whitaker, and dozens of other familiar faces from around town. Miss Opal sat near the front, waving Wren over with a warm, grateful smile. Eleanor stood at the podium, her expression serious but determined. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, she began, addressing the gathered crowd. Tonight I intend to present clear evidence regarding the business practices of Ashford Land Holdings, evidence that I believe demonstrates a pattern of intimidation, fabricated legal claims, and outright fraud spanning at least the past 3 years. A murmur moved through the crowd, tension and anticipation mixing visibly. Eleanor methodically presented the case, property records laid clearly beside county documentation, showing definitively that the cited code violations simply did not exist. She played, with Boone Whitaker's careful authorization, portions of the security footage from the Halloway farm, the room falling completely silent as Colt's aggressive advance, and Wren's controlled, restrained response, played clearly for everyone to witness. Then, to Wren's surprise, Gideon Marsh rose from his seat near the back of the hall, requesting to speak. Eleanor nodded, gesturing him forward. Most of you don't know me well, Gideon began, his calm, steady voice carrying clearly through the hall. I keep mostly to myself these days, but years ago, I did brief security consulting work for Warren Ashford's company. He paused, letting the words settle over the room. During that time, he continued, I personally overheard discussions of using intimidation tactics against smaller landowners, tactics designed to look legitimate on paper while functioning as nothing more than fear-based coercion. I refused further involvement immediately, and I've regretted, for years, not doing more to warn others sooner. He looked toward Wren, something warm and proud crossing his weathered features. I've also had the honor, he continued, of training this young woman in disciplined self-defense for the past 4 years. Not for aggression, for protection. What you witnessed in that footage tonight, that controlled, restrained response, that's not luck. That's years of careful, deliberate discipline, exactly the opposite of the reckless aggression Warren Ashford has been quietly using against this entire community. A wave of murmurs, this time carrying clear notes of anger and resolve, moved through the crowded hall. One by one, other residents began rising to speak. Ruthie Colson admitted, tearfully, to her fear-driven silence at the market weeks earlier, promising going forward to speak up, regardless of personal cost. Harold Fenwick spoke about witnessing Colt's initial assault, expressing deep regret for his own hesitation, and firm resolve to formally testify if needed. Even Sylvia, from the post office, stood to share how many local businesses had quietly struggled under financial pressure, tied indirectly to Ashford's growing influence throughout the county. Slowly, steadily, the collective silence that had protected Warren Ashford for years continued cracking further apart, replaced by a community finally finding its shared voice. Near the back of the hall, unnoticed by most, Dean Prescott sat quietly, watching everything unfold with a troubled, conflicted expression. After the meeting concluded, as people slowly filtered out into the cool evening air, Dean approached Eleanor Voss hesitantly. "I have the full video," he said quietly. "From the festival, the unedited version. I've had it this whole time." Eleanor's expression sharpened with immediate interest. "Would you be willing to provide it formally?" she asked carefully, as evidence. Dean hesitated, clearly wrestling with loyalty to Colt against his own growing conscience. "I should have shown it honestly from the start," he admitted quietly. "I was scared of what Colt would think, what everyone would think. But watching everyone stand up tonight, I don't want to be the person who stayed quiet anymore." "Thank you," Eleanor said gently. "That takes real courage." Dean handed over his phone, the unedited footage clearly showing the true sequence of events: Colt's initial aggressive grab and Wren's controlled, defensive response. With that final piece of evidence secured, Eleanor's case against Warren Ashford and his company stood stronger than ever. Over the following week, events moved swiftly, with overwhelming evidence now formally presented. Colt Ashford faced formal charges of assault, trespassing, and harassment. Given his young age, first offense status, and the eventual genuine remorse he expressed, the county prosecutor agreed to a plea arrangement involving significant community service, mandatory anger management counseling, and formal, public apologies to both Wren and Earl. Warren Ashford's situation proved considerably more serious. The county board, presented with clear evidence of fabricated code violations and coordinated intimidation tactics, launched a formal investigation into Ashford Land Holdings' business practices. Several previous land sales, including the Petrov family's earlier forced sale, came under serious legal scrutiny, with possibilities of restitution now being formally explored. Warren, facing mounting legal pressure and rapidly eroding business relationships, was ultimately removed from his position by his own company's board of directors. His reputation and his carefully built empire of quiet intimidation, finally, thoroughly exposed. The formal hearing before the county board took place on a cold, clear morning, 10 days after that packed community meeting. Wren had never stood in front of so many people in her life, not counting the market square, and even that felt different somehow, quieter, less certain. The county building smelled like old wood and fresh coffee. Rows of fold chairs lined the meeting room, and every single one of them was filled. Farmers she had known her whole life sat shoulder to shoulder with people she barely recognized, drawn in by weeks of quiet gossip, finally breaking open into something the whole county wanted to witness firsthand. Eleanor Voss stood at a small podium, calm and precise, walking the board members through months of careful documentation, property records, photographs, sworn statements from 5 different families, each one describing a version of the same fear, the same vague threats, the same tight deadlines designed to wear people down before they had time to think clearly. When it was Azul's turn to speak, he stood slowly, one hand resting briefly on the back of his chair for balance. "I've farmed that land for over 50 years, he said, his voice carrying clearly despite its rough, weathered edges. "My father cleared half those fields with a mule and his own 2 hands. I don't scare easy, but I'll admit that letter scared me." He paused, looking out over the crowded room. Not because I believed there was really a code violation, he continued, because I understood, clearly, that a man with enough money can make trouble for an honest family, whether he's right or not, simply because he can afford lawyers we can't. A murmur of agreement moved through the room. When Wren spoke, she kept her words simple. She did not talk about training, or skill, or the moment she had faced Colt Ashford in her own front yard. She talked instead about her parents, about the straw hat, about what it felt like to watch a whole town freeze in silence while someone she loved was frightened in broad daylight. "I'm not asking for anything extraordinary," she said quietly, near the end. "I'm just asking this board to look at what's actually true, and to let that truth matter more than anybody's money." By the time the hearing concluded that afternoon, the board had voted unanimously to formally investigate every property acquisition connected to Ashford Land Holdings over the previous 3 years, with several county officials, previously cooperative with Warren Ashford, quietly stepping down from their positions. In the days that followed, unable to withstand the scrutiny, now suddenly turned toward them as well. Not every part of healing happens in a courtroom, or a county hearing, or even a crowded community hall. Some of it happens much more quietly. A few days after the hearing, Wren drove out to visit Roy Petrov, the elderly farmer whose land had been the very first one lost to Warren Ashford's tactics years earlier. Roy now lived in a small rented house on the edge of town, far smaller than the property he had once called home. The porch light was already on when Wren pulled up, though it was barely past 4 in the afternoon, the kind of early autumn dusk that makes small houses feel a little smaller, a little quieter. He answered the door slowly, surprised to find her standing there. "Wren Halloway," he said, studying her for a moment. "Heard your name mentioned plenty these past few weeks. I wanted to come see you myself," Wren said, "to tell you we haven't forgotten what happened to your family. Eleanor believes there may be a real path towards some kind of restitution now, given everything that's come out." Roy was quiet for a long moment, something complicated moving across his weathered face. "Lost that land 18 months ago," he said finally. "Some days it still doesn't feel real. Woke up on land my grandfather worked, went to sleep somewhere that never quite felt like home." "I'm sorry," Wren said softly. "For all of it. Wasn't your doing," Roy said, "but I appreciate you saying it all the same." He studied her a moment longer, something gentler settling into his tired eyes. "You know," he said, "your father used to help me repair fence line every spring, back when we were both young men with more energy than sense. Never once asked for anything in return. Just showed up because that's who he was." Wren felt her throat tighten slightly at the memory, one she hadn't heard before. "I didn't know that," she said quietly. "Lot of folks around here have stories like that about your family," Roy said. "Guess it makes sense you'd turn out the way you did. Kindness runs deep in some families, deeper than money ever could." Before she left, Wren promised to keep him updated as the investigation continued, and Roy, for the first time, in longer than he could remember, allowed himself a small, cautious flicker of hope that maybe somehow, some small piece of what had been taken from him might still be set right. Back at the farm that evening, Wren sat with Earl on the porch, the conversation with Roy still weighing gently on her mind. "Did you know," she asked, "that Dad used to help Roy Petrov with his fences every spring?" Earl smiled faintly at the memory. "Your father never could sit still if he thought somebody nearby needed a hand," he said. "Drove your mother crazy sometimes. Honestly, she'd have supper ready, and he'd still be out fixing somebody else's gate in the dark." Wren laughed softly, the sound easy and warm despite everything the past few weeks had carried. "I like hearing stories like that," she said. "Ones I didn't already know." "There's plenty more where that came from," Earl said. "Whenever you want to hear them." They sat together a while longer, the evening settling comfortably around them, crickets beginning their steady chorus somewhere out past the barn. "I keep thinking about something," Gideon said. Wren said eventually. "About fear cracking apart once somebody proves it doesn't have to win." "What about it?" Earl asked. "I think that's what happened here," Wren said slowly. "Not just with Warren Ashford, with the whole town. Everybody was carrying some small piece of fear, quietly, on their own. Ruthie with her lease, Roy with his land, Miss Opal with her garden. It took one thing breaking that silence for everybody else to find their voice too." Earl nodded slowly, considering her words. That's usually how real change happens, he said. Not all at once, from the top. Quietly, person by person, until enough people decide together they're done being afraid. Wren looked out over the darkening fields, thinking of her parents, of Gideon, of everyone who had played some quiet part in the past several weeks. I think that's the part I want to remember most, she said softly. Not the fight, not even winning. Just how many people finally found the courage to stand up together. Earl reached over, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. That's a good thing to remember, he said. Your grandmother always said courage was contagious, same as fear, just spreads a little slower sometimes. 2 weeks after that tense community meeting, Cedar Hollow held its regular Saturday farmers market once more. The town square filled with the familiar, comforting sounds of neighbors, greeting neighbors, laughter drifting warmly through crisp autumn air. Wren stood behind her family's table, arranging jars of honey carefully, her father's straw hat resting once more upon her head, fully repaired now, its worn brim catching the morning sunlight. Sheriff Boone Whitaker approached slowly, his expression warm, carrying something carefully in his hands. Got something for you, he said, holding out a small, framed photograph. Wren took it curiously and felt her breath catch slightly. It was an old photograph, one she had never seen before, of her parents standing proudly at this very market table. Years earlier, her father wearing that same straw hat, her mother laughing brightly beside him. Found it going through some old town archive photos, Boone explained gently. Thought you might like to have it. Thank you, Wren said softly, emotion tightening her throat. This means more than you know. Nearby, Colt Ashford approached hesitantly, dressed simply, none of his earlier arrogance remaining in his posture. He carried a small basket of vegetables, part of his mandated community service, working alongside local farmers, learning firsthand the value of honest, hard work he had once so carelessly dismissed. Wren, he said quietly, stopping before her table. I wanted to say, properly, in front of everyone, how sorry I am for everything. Wren studied him carefully, noting the genuine humility now present in his expression, so different from the careless cruelty she had first encountered weeks earlier. Apology accepted, she said simply. Everyone deserves a chance to become someone better than their worst moment. Colt nodded, gratitude evident in his eyes. I've been working with Mr. Higgins at the feed store, he said, learning things I probably should have learned a long time ago. That's good to hear, Wren said warmly. Keep at it. As Colt walked away, Miss Opal approached the table, embracing Wren warmly. Look at you, she said, smiling brightly, standing right here, exactly where you belong. Feels good to be back, Wren admitted, glancing around at the familiar, comforting scene surrounding her. Earl joined them shortly after, moving easily now, his shoulder fully healed, pride evident in every line of his weathered face, as he watched his granddaughter interact warmly with neighbors and friends throughout the busy morning. Your parents, he said quietly, standing beside her, would be so incredibly proud of you, Wren, not just for your strength, for your patience, your kindness, your refusal to let anger define you, even when you had every right to let it. Wren smiled softly, resting her head briefly against her grandfather's shoulder, feeling, for the first time in a very long while, a deep, settled peace. I think I finally understand what you and Gideon were always trying to teach me, she said quietly. Strength isn't about winning fights. It's about protecting what matters, and never losing yourself while you're doing it. Earl nodded slowly, pride and love evident in his tired, warm eyes. That's exactly right, he said softly. As the market continued bustling warmly around them, Wren looked out over the familiar square, filled with neighbors who had, in their own time, found the courage to stand together against fear and intimidation. She thought of her parents, gone but never truly absent, their memory woven carefully into every choice she made, every quiet act of patience and restraint she had practiced throughout the past several difficult weeks. She thought of Gideon Marsh, whose quiet wisdom had given her not just physical skill, but a deeper understanding of true strength, discipline paired always with compassion. She thought of her grandfather, steady and unwavering, teaching her through his own quiet example exactly what it meant to protect the people and places you loved most deeply. And she thought, finally, of Cedar Hollow itself, a town that had, together, slowly remembered exactly what it meant to stand up, honestly and courageously, for what was right. The straw hat rested comfortably upon her head, sunlight warming its worn, familiar brim, a quiet symbol no longer of humiliation, but of dignity fully restored. Wren Halloway had never wanted to be anyone's hero. She had simply wanted to protect her family, her home, and the quiet, hard-working community she loved. But sometimes, quiet acts of patience, courage, and restraint become exactly the kind of heroism a community needs most, especially when it finally finds the collective strength to stand together, refusing any longer to let fear decide who they were going to be. As the golden autumn sun rose higher over Cedar Hollow that Saturday morning, casting warm light gently across fields, faces, and familiar streets, one quiet truth remained clear to everyone gathered there. Sometimes, the strongest people in any town are exactly the ones who never raise their voice at all. Before the market fully closed for the day, one more visitor stopped by the Halloway table, someone Wren had not expected to see there at all. Dean Prescott stood a few feet away, hands shoved awkwardly into his jacket pockets, clearly working up the nerve to approach. "Hey," he said finally, stepping closer. "Got a minute?" "Sure," Wren said, setting down the jar she had been wrapping. "I just wanted to say." Dean started, then paused, searching for the right words. "What I did, filming that night and letting Colt use it the way he did, that wasn't right. I knew it wasn't right, even while I was doing it. You made it right in the end," Wren said. "That matters." "Took me longer than it should have," Dean admitted. "I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal, that I was just standing off to the side, not really doing anything. But standing off to the side isn't nothing. I understand that now." Wren studied him for a moment, remembering the uneasy look he'd worn back at the festival, the small flicker of doubt she had noticed even then. "Most people don't figure that out as young as you have," she said. "Some folks go their whole lives standing off to the side, telling themselves it's not their problem." Dean nodded slowly, something like relief crossing his face. "I'm working with Mr. Higgins too, actually," he said. "Same as Colt. Different hours, so we're not tripping over each other." "Good," Wren said, and meant it. "Hard work's got a way of teaching things that words can't always reach." Dean managed a small, grateful smile before heading off across the square, and Wren watched him go, feeling, not for the first time that day, a quiet sense that Cedar Hollow was slowly, steadily becoming something a little better than it had been before. Later that same afternoon, once the market crowds had thinned and the last customers had wandered off toward home, Wren stayed behind to help fold the family's table and pack away the unsold jars of honey. Earl had gone ahead with Duke to open the farm gate, leaving her a few quiet minutes alone in the square, the low autumn light stretching long shadows across the empty pavement. She sat for a moment on the edge of the fountain at the center of town, the straw hat resting in her lap, turning it slowly in her hands. It looked almost the same as it always had, a little more worn now perhaps, a few faint stains that would never fully wash out, but whole, repaired, still hers. She thought about the version of herself who had knelt in the mud weeks earlier, picking this same hat up out of a puddle, mud dripping from its brim, humiliation burning hot in her chest. She thought about how far that moment felt now, not because the pain of it had disappeared entirely, but because it no longer defined the shape of who she was. Gideon had told her once that the goal was never to stop feeling anger, or fear, or grief. The goal was simply to keep those feelings from making the choices for you. She understood that now in a way she hadn't fully understood before. Sheriff Whitaker's patrol car rolled slowly past the square, and he lifted 2 fingers off the steering wheel in a quiet wave. Wren waved back, smiling faintly. Somewhere down the street, she could hear Ruthie's diner sign creaking gently in the breeze, the smell of fresh pie drifting faintly on the wind. It was, in almost every way, an ordinary Saturday afternoon in a small town most people would never think twice about. But Wren understood now just how much quiet strength had gone into keeping it that way. Not loud strength, not the kind that makes headlines or gets remembered in history books, The kind that shows up early every morning to do the chores nobody sees. The kind that stays calm when every instinct says to strike first. The kind that stands quietly beside a frightened neighbor, simply so they don't have to stand alone. She rose from the fountain's edge, settling the straw hat gently back onto her head, and started the walk home, the sun sinking slowly behind the tree line, painting the sky in soft, familiar shades of gold and rose. The walk from the town square to the farm took nearly 20 minutes on foot, a route she had walked countless times before, past the old church, past the feed store, past the turnoff toward Gideon's property, each landmark carrying its own small piece of the past several weeks. By the time she reached the farmhouse gate, the first stars had already begun appearing overhead, faint and scattered against the deepening blue. Earl was waiting on the porch, Duke curled contentedly at his feet, a cup of coffee steaming gently in his hands. "Good day," he said, more statement than question, as she climbed the porch steps. "Good day," Wren agreed, settling into the chair beside him, the straw hat still resting comfortably on her head. Tomorrow, there would be chores waiting before sunrise. Same as always. There would be classes to attend, animals to feed, fences to mend. Life, ordinary and demanding, would continue exactly as it always had. The same early mornings, the same tired evenings, the same quiet rhythm that had carried the Halloway family through every hard season before this one, and would surely carry them through every season still to come. But something in Cedar Hollow had shifted permanently, quietly, and for the better. And Wren Halloway, walking home beneath her father's hat, in the fading autumn light, carried that knowledge with her, like a small, steady flame. Some fights are won with fists. Most, in the end, are won with patience, with truth, and with people finally choosing courage over fear together. That, more than anything else, was the lesson Cedar Hollow would carry forward, long after that particular autumn had faded quietly into winter. And that, more than anything else, was the lesson Wren intended to carry with her for the rest of her life. She thought, briefly, of all the small moments that had led here: a torn hat in a muddy puddle, a quiet drive to Gideon's porch at dawn, an old woman's trembling hands steadying over a row of tomatoes, a sheriff's careful footsteps up a dusty driveway, a whole crowded hall finding its voice one nervous speaker at a time. None of it had felt large in the moment. Each piece had simply felt like the next right thing to do, however small, however uncertain, but strung together, quietly, patiently. Those small moments had changed the whole shape of a town. That, Wren decided, settling deeper into her chair beside her grandfather, as the evening settled fully into night, was probably how most real change actually happened. Not all at once, not with fanfare, just one honest choice, followed by another, until enough of them, taken together, finally added up to something worth calling courage, something an entire town could stand on, and something a young woman in a straw hat would carry quietly, proudly, for the rest of her days.